What's up, guys? It's Mr. Janvet, and today we are back for another episode. I mean, it's been Lord knows how long since the last On the Contrary. Today's episode is going to be very different. I think this might be the first time. Maybe not, because I think when I was doing sort of co-recordings with Joey Blunder, when we sort of went over our journeys and how we came to be, I think I did something similar to this, but I don't think I've ever done it with somebody that's not a YouTuber. So today I have Theo with me, known as, if you're familiar with the Academy, you know Theo very well because he's one of the administrators there. Help pretty much run that thing. When shout outs to Devin and JG and CG as well. In my absence, they really, none of this would be possible without the staff in the academy. So I just want to shout them out while we're here. But he's one of the administrators. It's come a long way. And we're gonna talk about how Pokemon has transformed his life offline in ways that you never could have predicted. And so now he he has his own supplement company, or I'll have him talk more about that. But it's doing quite well, quite well. In I think an insanely short amount of time. And he attributes a lot of the growth in that from actually some of the lessons he got from here, and we'll get into that. But if you're somebody who is currently, I think will be two big lessons in this. If you're currently, you're about to make a big decision, a big life transition. For him, he had to leave university. He had to decide, okay, is that worth? Is that necessary for what I want to pursue? And obviously, if you're in university right now, particularly if your parents are very old school, they're like, you better stay in school, yada yada yada. That's the pathway. So to leave and sort of go against that grain, it's a very difficult decision, not just personally, but just dealing with the backlash from family, and whoever else, and the risk. Like, what if you don't succeed and everybody judges you and like, see, we told you, all that. So if you're in a place where you're making big decisions like those, this will be a really dope conversation to listen to. And also, if you are someone that struggles with, let's say, the mental components, you're gonna hear the mental components mean maybe you're very anxious often, whether offline or actually in mons. The losing is good concept is still a concept, and you still rage and feel horrendous when you take an L. And these are important to understand because you can't have success without them. Like, you could not, like, it won't happen. You will always be a failure if you don't get over this. So if that is where you are, I recommend tapping in and joining us on this ride, as it's going to be a very great conversation. So without further ado, I'll have Theo introduce himself, starting with where he is now, sort of a brief sort of where he is now, and then we'll get into how he got here, because it turns out he actually couldn't stand my guts when he was first introduced to me, which is very common actually offline as well. People think when they see me, they think I seem like an arrogant person because my posture, how I look, and it's very common. People think, oh, this guy thinks he's better than everyone, and then they meet me and they're okay. All right, this guy is actually not that bad. So yeah, enough about that. I'll have Theo introduce himself.
All right, hello. So I'm Theo, and I joined the academy a couple years ago now and changed my life. So where I am now is so I've recently left university and I'm currently making about 90 grand a year in US dollars at 19. like self-employed working from home, and this is like right at the start. A year ago this was, or even a few months ago this was zero. So it's growing, and all of the concepts that I've learned here in the academy have been what led me onto that. So yeah, that's about what I have to say for myself at the moment. But
Hell yeah. And it's funny as you said that. And I thought about it the other day because I was on a coaching call, and well, two people in particular, funnily enough, and we'll get into this. Two people in particular, as a result of the, again, we'll get into this as far as the audience. You'll get into the why this happens. Um, but basically, through Mons, their fitness offline has improved. And, I think both mentioned is like, yeah, I definitely need to get Theo's pre-workout when he releases it. So I don't think they know that your product's out, because I think I didn't even know that. So definitely let them know. And for everybody listening, if you want to try his product, as long as that's available, the link will be in the description down below. But it's actually funny to hear that, one, you're already doing what that you already have clients waiting for your thing to come out. So
yeah.
yeah. But take us.
Yeah, so
Go
I
ahead.
was similar in the situation that my fitness has improved so much since I joined the academy. I think it was actually within a few days of joining the academy. I think it was like 2 days later was when I started working out.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like 2.5 years ago now. Started off just working at home, which ended up being quite convenient since COVID was a few months after that.
Really?
And yeah, so I started working out at home, and then I was like all prepared when COVID hit. Quite funny. But now I have like a bodybuilding contest next year. So that was one of the first things that I noticed of like massive gains just from being in the academy.
Yeah.
And I think I've gained like 18 kilos since then,
Whoa.
from 53 kilos to 71.
That's nuts. This is my first time hearing of this. I know you work out, obviously. I mean, you have a pre-workout company. I mean, it'd be
Yeah.
kind of janky if you were like
Yeah, I
obese
would.
and having a workout,
Yeah.
a fitness brand. But so I figured that much, and we've had discussions and things of that nature. But what was the catalyst for that? I actually didn't know that.
I mean, this was a long time ago now,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm not really sure exactly, but I know that when I joined the academy, I'd already known about you for like a decent bit, a couple months.
Mm-hmm.
And this was kind of a point where I really wanted to improve, and I wanted something that like kind of sustained me, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted something more.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that like part of that was like learning more about Pokemon. And I think that's what a lot of people go to is when they're not feeling like the best, they just sort of find something new to do, and they
Mm-hmm.
want to grow and become better at that. And that's kind of the whole concept of this I wanted to talk about, which is that that's almost the entire skill of life. The way that you learn Pokemon is the way that you learn everything, and the way that you find yourself. So yeah, and I think that was part of why I started working out at the same time. It was just trying a few new things out. But I think so. I'm not sure that could be attributed directly to joining here, but I think definitely continuing for the whole time did, as well as like all of the other changes in my life.
Mm. Okay, that makes sense. Particularly when I'm recalling the time, because the academy has existed for about a little over 2 years. So I remember that initial sort of culture. It was all forming because this was birthed from my channel being hacked. Right? It was sort of a
Yeah.
screw it. I'm not
Yeah, I mean
going
that's how I
down.
heard about you in the first place. I think it was like Joey and Blunder and stuff talking about you.
For
And
the
I watched a couple of videos, and this is where I wasn't a fan at first. It was
uh
something that you said, which was that um, I don't remember the exact scenario, but
hmm
someone made a play and like killed one of your mons,
hmm
and you were saying, "Oh, that was such a like such a stupid play from them
Uh,
that they were like throwing the game, and I would just look at you like, what do you mean?
right.
They just like beat you in that interaction, and you're like saying that they're bad for it. It just seemed like it was, I don't know, like your own ego
Yeah.
telling you that you made the right decision. And
Right.
it wasn't until like a while after that that I understood that. I don't think I went back and watched the same video, but I understood the mindset that people can make plays that like work well,
Right.
but they're not very good. So
Right.
they've like thrown away their win con, but
Right.
it worked out.
Right. Which is something I get a lot for years. That's probably one of the for the few times I do get something in the comments. It's usually somebody saying some version of that. It's like, well, I mean, maybe da, 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 da. Um, I was trying to think of an analogy. Maybe let's use something in the gym. Though this isn't a perfect one, but because this isn't the point of the video, but just to give context for whoever is listening, it's sort of like if somebody is trying to do some, let's say, okay, this might work. Let's say that Theo and his buddy both are trying to get up a particular amount of weight. Say it's a deadlift. His buddy gets it up, Theo doesn't. But Theo practiced perfect form, couldn't get it up. Buddy said screw it and did all kinds of janky stuff. Managed to get it up, but from a long-term perspective, that's actually not a good thing. What he had to do to get it up, like he could injure himself if he continues that particular pattern. Whereas Theo, while he couldn't get it up today, assuming he continues with the great form and training, will not only surpass him, but also in the long term, also just be okay. So it's the short
Yeah.
term sort of thing you have to do to get that result is really negative over time.
It's that you got lucky in that situation. The injury is like a like to them not switching and then just like you losing your win con. You lose the game instantly.
Right. So that behavior in the game may have worked in that one situation, but it's the reason they can't get beyond a certain point because of the thinking that caused that. So it's addressing the fundamental reason why that was not a positive decision versus the situations in that specific moment, which is what Theo says. Well, he won, so it must be a good play. It's like, well, that's like saying he got the weight up, so it must be good form. Mm, that's not exactly true. You want to think about the long term. Like, what are you practicing? And over 2 weeks, 3 weeks, making that same decision, where will you end up? Right.
And it's the same in the game that was just one single turn and you have the whole of the battle in every other game that you play.
Mm-hmm. 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 But going back to that, so obviously you're like, okay, this guy is just a jerk, arrogant, whatever, right? And I think there were periods where I was more arrogant. I think I've oscillated. I think I have it in me to to have that like God complex, not just in minds. I think that's something I have to be very mindful of. Um, I think partly due to almost only child, blah blah blah, and have had a lot of gifts, and things tend to work out. I developed fixed mindsets very young. I didn't know what those were back then, obviously, but only doing things that you're good at. If you didn't work out in the beginning, then it must not be for you. That mindset certainly was how I thought, and so I'd avoid things that I wasn't that great at. It doesn't feel good to not be the best at the things that you're doing. Like that's what you're used to. So I can certainly. I don't think it's purely just your perception. And how I sound too sometimes can come off very like this guy thinks he knows everything, So I don't think it's all on Theo for why he came to that conclusion. Um, but
Well, I think there's also like a reason why I continued watching
I was
because I
gonna ask
continued
that.
watching after that moment, and I'm trying to rack my brain about why exactly that was because this was like 2.5 years ago now, and it's quite difficult to actually remember.
Hmm.
But I think I liked the way that you seemed like you knew a lot.
Hmm.
It's like in between that is that I sort of had this. I think there was quite a bit of resistance that
Hmm.
you had like you had like the social status from other people shouting you out, talking about how good you were, that you
Hmm.
had a book and things like that. And a lot of the other things that you said, you could tell that they were like positive and constructive. And then
Hmm.
you had this one moment that seemed like I don't know, incongruency.
Hmm.
And I was just thinking, why is this?
Hmm.
So I think it was that the overall message was that there's something to learn here.
Hmm.
And that's why I continued watching. And that's why I ended up figuring out that it wasn't really much of a like an incongruency. It was like actually the truth in a way.
Mm. Did you join the academy before then? Meaning, when you joined the academy, was there still that resistance, or by that time you had already gotten over that?
Yeah, I believe when I joined, I still had the same resistance. I didn't really get it.
Okay.
And then it was a few months after, it was still a while after that I actually kind of got it and understood that because I mean it's like it's quite a difficult concept to understand that the play that worked out and that won you the game was a bad one.
Hmm.
So that took me a while to figure out, to be honest.
And it's not intuitive. It does take quite a bit of experience. I think I had a video recently, actually, where I did something like that. It was the Golurk video. I remember in particular, I went to Golurk and a Dragonite, and I said to them, like, I literally, the moment I clicked the Golurk, like, my awareness peaked. And I was like, wait, what am I doing? Because he could be faster than me in Roost. And there were just several other options that were better. Now, it ended up working out. He was slower than me, and I killed him. But I
Yeah, but
kept,
in any other situation, you might have lost that game just off of the back of one decision.
well, it wouldn't have lost the game or anything. It wasn't that kind of thing. But
Mhm.
it just was not, of all the options I had, because Golurk was so devastating. I'm like, well, he can't guard against Ghost. I broke into multi-scale, da 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 da.
Mhm.
But objectively, there were like 4 or 5 other options that were superior.
Yeah. I
So
mean, one thing I want to say on that is that is I think there's quite a bit of peace of mind you can get from that, that this will improve over time without you even like putting that much effort in. I think just the exposure in general to playing the game will like you will gain that awareness.
oh yeah, oh yeah. As
I
assuming you're
mean,
practicing. Go ahead.
I think the skills that you teach are just ways to accelerate the growth and to like if you hit a plateau, that's kind of what you need to do. But I think in general, you can still learn and improve without that, just from more exposure. But it may take like 3, 4, 5 times the amount of time.
Yeah, yeah, or probably more. If you have no sort of guidance at all, meaning like no 3 pillars, no basics, because those are all things that were introduced through as a means of simplifying this all and getting to the core of things. So if you have no guidance whatsoever, then it'll take. You might never
Yeah.
get out of it. Actually, it's interesting. I'll say that because I think about what sparked me having to get to sort of the first principles or the science of Mons is partly because back in my highly competitive days, tour wise, there were players that were around forever, and year after year, consistently were mediocre. With regards to the level we were at. So not mediocre to maybe somebody on
Mhm.
the ladder, but you know, when you're at the peak of the peak, you know, to me they were mediocre, and to anybody else who got great results. So I was like, well, what? How can you have? There has to be more to this than merely gaining experience, um, because at that point they had the most. And so I came to the realization, and that's how the 3 pillars came up to be. Like that was the great differentiator. You can
Mhm.
you
I think there's one thing that you don't mention enough of, which is I think you called it mental RAM.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been reading Mastery by Robert Greene lately, and
Mm-hmm.
it talks about how when you continue repeating a task,
Mm-hmm.
that skill is internalized and you can think about the bigger picture when you're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when I started, I couldn't think more than one turn ahead.
Correct.
And then as I continued and continued, I could think there was like positions in end games where I could think 15 to 20 turns ahead, just knowing exactly what could happen and like plan out which route I wanted to go. Like it was a chess game.
Yes.
And it's just like the change that you can make there. And I think that's a massive like way to improve your game that most people don't have. Because not only does it make you quicker and better at the timer, which will also like pressure them to like not have as much time to think if they're just clicking,
Right.
but it's also like you will make better decisions because you have more awareness of what will happen in the future.
I'm glad you pointed that out because the new book that's coming out, it's actually called The Science. Oh, that's the tentative name. The Science of Competitive Pokemon this time because it's I thought the first book, well, the one that's really the second, but first as far as y'all are concerned, because you've never gotten the first one, was really the greatest depth. Like I really thought it was at the most fundamental level, and in writing this new one, it is insane how much better it is. Like I mean, like the so I won't go into the answer to that. But I mentioned that because just maybe 2 weeks ago, I was breaking down that very concept in writing, the very concept of what actually happens scientifically, why that happens, and how this relates to not just minds but everywhere else. Because what I want people to gain is what you're gaining and what you've gained, which is a broader application and realization that this isn't a lot of this stuff is not specific to mods.
It's not a game. It's like life.
Right. Which is a game. It's just an infinite game versus Pokemon, which is a finite game. And we'll get into that um, as we continue. But I'm glad that you pointed that out because, and if anything else that comes up like that just throughout your experience, definitely mention it because I want to make sure that I cover every base in this book to where somebody's like, it's so insanely good that I mean, like I just want it to be the best possible thing ever in existence, to where I can finally say, okay, I'm done writing about mods. As far as like a book is concerned, I want it to be the
I
ultimate.
have a question on that then.
Yeah.
So, did you ever notice that when you played more and more, that you would sort of imagine sequences of turns in your mind that you like knew a position that would be good for you? Say you have like a Specs Lele
Mm-hmm.
that can just click Psychic against everything,
Mm-hmm.
and you imagine a specific situation where say you like double into Lele and then make another double into something else that's like
Mm-hmm.
so you're in against the mon that you want to be in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think I'd describe that very well. I think so.
Well,
Say you have a Lele that clicks Specs
what's the
Psychic against
question?
everything, but it has one mon that it can click it on easily that
Right.
is quicker than that he has to switch out,
Right.
and you try and position yourself into that,
Right.
and you imagine a sequence of plays where you can maybe think 4 turns backwards
Right.
of like how you can get into that situation of like a specific double or something like that.
Right.
Because what I found was when I started playing more and more, and specifically my one like run
Mm-hmm.
to being like number 6
Mm-hmm.
on the ladder, that I'd end up having like 4 or 5 of these sequences in my mind
Mm-hmm.
at the start of the game. And as soon as I found myself in one of them, I would just sort of maneuver myself into like something I've already thought about
Mm-hmm.
and end up in like a winning position from that.
So what's your question then? So I can make sure that I'm clear on what you're asking me before I say anything.
Yeah, is that something that you ever like noticed or like suggested to others in your like awareness at the start of the game? Because I've not really heard that mentioned much.
What? That's just called positioning. Yeah, you're talking about foresight and positioning, which are. That's why I was wondering. Are you talking about something different than those concepts? Because you're describing the imagining part is called foresight, and what you're using the foresight, the action part, is known as positioning. So you're applying the three actions to get yourself to the point where you feel like you can take the most value, which is laying that
it's
concept.
exactly that. But I would do that at the start of the game before even like actually playing the game. And I don't think that's really mentioned anywhere that you can create a sequence of plays. I think it's kind of the step, because there's a few steps to awareness, which is
one second.
saying
You're I just want to make sure that it's not just getting caught that way in the recording, but your audio is kind of sort of robotic. Can you say something again? Let me make sure it's good.
Is that all right now? Or?
Yeah, it's still robotic. It just randomly chipped in when you started talking about. It's exactly that.
Is that any better, or is it still the same?
No, it's perfect now. Yeah, but continue.
Okay. Yeah, so I think there's a kind of stages of awareness, which is the first one is knowing, like say you have a Specs Lele that they can't guard against. That's something that you want to win with. And then I think the second stage of that is like, who is this good against, and who can I actually use this? And I think the third stage of that is to position yourself into that situation and to come up with like specific ways that you can do that.
Yes. So what you're describing is, again, I'm trying not to have this go pretty much breaking down the book, but I'm glad you mentioned that. So for those who maybe are listening, that was like, oh, damn, actually that's really good question. I want to know. So essentially it's foresight. Now let's do this very quickly. If you have questions in the comments more specific to this, just go to the Academy and message me in the Just for Jam channel, and I can sort of break this down a bit more specifically. But so in the third pillar of awareness is simply the ability to notice. Like, can you notice something? If your eyes are closed, you're not aware of anything in, for say, your bedroom. You may have memory because you've been there before. But if any changes occur, meaning if somebody walks in or is about to punch you in the face that's in the room, you're not aware of it. So you can't apply a skill before you have awareness. So first you have to notice something, then you can apply the skill necessary. So if you're Floyd Mayweather and your eyes are closed in the room, for example, it doesn't matter that you're one of the greatest avoider of punches of all time. You're still getting punched in the face because your awareness piece isn't there, so you can't apply the skill to dodge. So kind of going back to what you're describing with foresight and positioning, first you have to be aware, as you mentioned, what can I guard against, what can he guard against. What those questions do is they spark your awareness. They actually don't do anything. All they do is turn the lights on, so to speak. Now that you have the lights on, you can apply skill. Okay, now that I'm aware of what I'm dealing with, what the situation is, what do I need to do about it? So then that's when you go, okay, what's my objective? Now that I know what the situation is, what's my objective? Okay, using your example, my objective is to sweep him or annihilate his team with my choice specs Tapu Lele. Okay, now that I've had the objective, now we're going to describe the strategy. And I actually learned this delineation from a coaching client that I had very recently. So shout outs to the third Ridoku. It's very, very cool guy. So he mentioned this. So that's why I'm using objective, strategy, tactics versus any other language. But the objective is basically where you want the end point. The strategy, or the endpoint, or the win condition, using Pokemon terms. The strategy would be considered a game plan. So what's the actual plan? Now, the difference with a game plan and what you're talking about is a game plan is completely mental. It's completely theoretical. So this means you have no information. You don't know what their sets are. The game has not started. So game plans are only mental. They're just roadmaps or a GPS, a theoretical thing you think you can do. Now, tactics are the short-term actions you take. So what you're describing are tactics you use to position yourself. So you have the strategy, the overall game plan of, okay, I'm going to get Layla in versus Hippowdon, that's Fizdef or something, and psychic things away. Or whatever the thing is, right? It could be a Venusaur, whatever you feel like, Lele is going to be great position in. But that's only theory, because you haven't discovered the how. How am I going to actually do that? That's the part that you're describing. Tactics. How am I going to do this? So I need to double here, I need to switch here, I need to bait this in here, you're talking about the tactical things you do mid-game. And tactics can repeat themselves because you can find yourself in a similar enough situation often because team structures are similar, right? In OU, most people use similar stuff. So the tactics that you applied 2 games ago, assuming you review your games, you learn from it, you realize what you did well, you'll realize, oh shoot, while it's not the exact same team, similar enough structure. So let me see.
You can use the same tactic. Exactly.
Bingo. And over time, and this is why people go into autopilot, over time you may do that so much that the mental RAM you're describing increases, so that part of it is no longer conscious. You don't have to think that long about doubling to Lele, boom, 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 boom. Like, you're not thinking consciously as much. So if your focus isn't on the turn in front of you, and your sort of your capacity is expanded, that means you can now keep in awareness 3, 4, 5 turns at a time, and even more the more you do that, because now you don't have to consciously think, okay, so I have my Tapu Lele, and what is he gonna go to? You're not consciously using your focus on that. You already know what he's gonna go to. So that's now in what's called unconscious competence, or your memory, mental RAM. There are a lot of words for this, but because that's now just quickly accessed, similar to how you can drive and text at the same time. When the first time you were driving, you couldn't, like, all your focus was on the car because it was a new skill. Now you can drive, juggle some balls, talk on the phone. You can do a million things because now driving no longer requires conscious attention, and that applies to everything else. So up front, it takes a lot of mental energy, but over time your brain reduces it to just a mindless activity. And when your brain does that, in Pokemon, your foresight improves, meaning you can see more turns ahead. You can contemplate more things in the moment than you used to be able to. So that's what you're describing right now with the experience. The more you play, that's the more technical sort of description of that process. And this all will be described in the book. And that's a very sort of Cliff Notes or Spark Notes version. But that's just for whoever wanted to understand what Theo is talking about. Hopefully that was helpful.
We should probably move on to the topic of we've sort of been talking about Pokemon this entire time, and we've not really delved into how it relates to, like, life in general.
Okay, yeah, actually, I think knowing my audience, I think they'll appreciate sort of we're starting with the point, right? Everybody is Pokemon players, so that's where we're most familiar with each other. That's the common ground.
Yeah.
But yeah, so now we've discovered, okay, you came. I already saw some improvement, after you got over the slight resistance. Started working out. So when did it transition for you from, okay, I don't know, we'll see, to, no, I want, there's something here that I want, like I want, meaning from an improvement standpoint, there's something about this that's worth the investment, the emotional pain, because you actually, I think, got a coaching session from me at one time, like way back.
Yeah, right at the start when I started.
Right. So, like, what got you to the point where it's like, no, I'm, like, I don't want to be, I think you were 1,300 at the time. Um,
Yeah. I think it was partly like ego driven that essentially as soon as I'd started, I went up to a 13, 1400
mhm,
within a few weeks. Just sort of like I'd played Pixelmon in the past
mhm,
and I had some experience from there, but I had never really played and it was a completely different experience. And I think it was as soon as and I was enjoying obviously going up that whole time. And as soon as I wasn't and as soon as I hit a plateau, that was like my motivation to
mm,
like learn more about improving and stuff. Because initially it was I actually just enjoyed watching the videos.
mhm,
Like I enjoyed watching a bunch of different videos on the game. It was just sort of like entertaining, right? It wasn't about learning.
mhm.
And then once I hit that plateau, I was sort of like forced to be like, yeah, okay, there are things I can be doing better.
Ah, okay. So then, I mean, at this point, you were in the academy already, right? When you hit that
Yeah.
1400. Okay. And, just to give context to everybody, if you're not familiar with the academy and you're living under a rock, um, the environment is very learning focused, like very growth mindset focused, meaning, it's, it's all about progress. So no matter where you are, no matter who you are, everybody in there is well, for the most part. And if you're not, you get kicked out. But very supportive, very encouraging, and so this is the environment Theo came in, and around that time, there were several people that were around where you were, same journey. So,
Yeah, I mean, I was being given teams and stuff and people like analyzing my replays and suggesting what to do, and it was great.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Nah, man, we're gonna get back to the, the good old days soon, so,
Mhm.
and better. But yeah, that was a beautiful time in the academy. Now, so you get to that point. We won't. I mean, if you want to touch on, this, I guess getting the session, um, you can. But more importantly, I want to transition to the part where, because you had gotten the session and you grew pretty fast. I think you got after the session. I think you jumped maybe 300 points, but then you plateaued for a long time.
Yeah, it was
Um,
a really long time that I plateaued. I think I think I didn't really get past 1600
mm,
for probably close to a year.
I'd say about a year.
And
It might be over a year. Yeah.
I think it was, I didn't really try pushing. I didn't really practice that much.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I was enjoying team building and this was the whole time like the Academy Premier League was going on.
Right.
I think the first one.
Right.
Um, and I was practicing for that and like playing against teammates and stuff like that. And that was sort of my practice.
Right.
And it continued throughout like season two and season three of that. I think at the end, this is off the top of my head. I've not looked at the documents, but I think season two and season three, I ended up going like 11 and 2,
Mm-hmm.
which I was really happy with. Um, and then it was one specific moment that really pushed me out of the plateau, which was so Devon got me a tryout for the UK World Cup team, and I just choked on both of the games. And I was this it's the same as like when I approached you for the coaching call that I
Mm-hmm.
was completely forced to confront the decision. Sorry, to confront that I wasn't playing well enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's that I could see that I choked and I had the choice of either like blocking that out or being like, right, I choked. I'm not as good as I think I am.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not as good as I should be or want to be. That is my focus. And that's what I did. And I ended up I made a new account and I think I won like 90 something percent of the games up to 1700 and then ended up getting to like, which was already like a new like peak.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up pushing like 300 points further than that to 1985, which was number six at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then with the same team, I ended up beating Ox the Fox the same week like the Premier League.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, that was kind of my peak, and I was sort of content with where I was after that. I think I learned a lot more about myself in that experience than about Pokemon itself,
Mm.
just from having to confront the fact that I wasn't good enough and that I had to focus on learning. And I think that was really where everything changed for me in terms of like actually improving myself, like in the real world.
Mm. Yeah, and to give a bit of context, Devin is one of the other admins and also um, very he does very well in tournaments. Um, Another mentee of mine, because Devin, similar to you, only thing Devin's conversations are more just how to get like do better in Mons.
He's so dedicated and focused on improving. It's just insane.
Yeah, yeah,
He has so much motivation for it.
yes, yes, which is why you ended up getting connected enough to UK trials, blah blah blah, and he's because when I first met Devin, that's a whole other story. But I'm really proud to see how far he had gone before that nonsense happened. Um,
Mhm.
an Oxafox who Theo managed to beat. Actually, I think ended up. Yeah, he might have won OLT that year.
Yeah, he
I
did.
think he won it that year. So also a solid player, Oxafox. I mean, I think Oxafox may have been around before I was even good. Like I mean, like he's been around for a while. Like
Really.
yeah, I mean like before I even started playing tours. So like a long time. So it's good to see him, finally getting the fruits of his labor. Cool dude as well. But just to give context to the audience in case. So these aren't just random people. These are very successful tournament players. And so I want to go back a bit to that transition because you glossed over some important things. Maybe because, it's just like it's been so long.
Hmm.
But around that time, how that actually happened is that you messaged me, right? And prior to that,
Mm.
you
Yeah.
linked me. So you've been so over time, and you can go into that a bit because I think people don't really have context for why you versus anybody else are on this podcast, right? Or like why
Hmm.
I message you too, Jam. Like, and I've grown, right? So, um, around that time, so Theo has been sort of, yeah. I think it's important to give context, but I guess a bridge between how you got from, um, I think we kind of got over how you got from disliking me to being neutral, I suppose, or maybe even
Hmm.
slightly over neutral. But obviously throughout that period of time, there were a lot of conversations in the DMs, all that contributed to the growth. And in that particular circumstance, when you ended up getting to from I think it was like 1500 to 19, almost 2024 hours. Um,
Hmm.
you messaged me when you lost the World Cup game, and prior to the World Cup game, I think you messaged me maybe for I think advice or help or something like that, and I linked you a video, one of the mindset videos, and you watched it, and you didn't like you're like oh, yeah yeah yeah, and then you lost, and then you watched it again. No, or I think something I said in it landed after the loss,
Yeah.
and then that's when the change occurred.
Yeah. So I think I have forgotten that happened, but you're saying it now, and I think you're better to talk about this than me. I kind of like,
I don't know what
it was a
happened.
while ago now.
I mean, I don't know what happened within yourself, but I know that because that's when the because I mean obviously I'm questioning getting the data because this was a tremendous change from someone who plateaued for probably a year plus at 1700 or 1600 to transit to jump because this is I don't think people understand how significant this jump was. It's like from mid 1500s to almost top 5 on the ladder in 24 hours. That's around that time I didn't have the I guess I think around that time I might have, but there were still sort of anomalous situations. I was still gathering a lot of data on just how fast a person can improve, and just how much the mental component trumps the skill side. Uh, and your journey was a good example. I've had ones like that before, but that was just one of the first super significant jumps, other than maybe Spooky, but Spooky was just new, right? So he didn't know anything, and so he did what, like, I think from 1,000 to almost 1,900 in a week.
Yeah,
Um,
it was something stupid like that.
right, but I was like, that was a, everything in one. You had to learn the skills. Like that was like a very rare circumstance. But in your case, you had been playing. You had been in the Academy PL. I think you didn't do well in the first one, and this was after that. Um,
Yeah.
we had conversations about that. Um, but in this case, with no new skills, to have a 1,400 point jump, I mean a 400 point jump, give or take, in a
Yeah,
day.
so I'm just rereading the messages because I did kind of forget that it happened. So it was I think it was just the entire fact that I was trying to protect my ego,
Mm-hmm.
and I could really tell that this was happening.
Mm-hmm.
That the instant I lost, it was that I could see these things that I made, like I could see the mistakes that I made,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like actively trying to like cover them up as if they didn't happen,
Mm-hmm.
and I could just see this happening, and I just had this decision of like it was a decision that I can either cover them up and pretend that I'm okay or like uncover it and go into that.
Mm-hmm.
And this was when I like realized that I am not playing as good as I can. And that just struck me with so much motivation to find more and more mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like every game was this is where I completely embodied the mindset of a win is just as valuable as a loss,
Mm-hmm.
if not more valuable.
The other way
Sorry, a
around.
loss is just
Mm-hmm.
yeah, a loss is just as valuable or more valuable than a win because I was completely focused on learning
Mm-hmm.
and I'd completely disidentified with my points at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Like it didn't matter to me. It just mattered to me that I was better. And in a way I was sort of like annoyed that I wasn't good enough
Mm-hmm.
to like qualify.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really where it came from, that it's sort of what you always say, that every game you play
Mm-hmm.
is like your learning experience to
Mm-hmm.
figure out the mistakes that you're making,
Mm-hmm.
like the learner's mindset. And it's easy to say, but
Yeah.
it's a completely different thing for when it hits you,
When
right?
you get 2 losses in a row, 3 losses in a row, you're
Yeah,
feeling all horrible inside. Like, yeah, a lot easier to
yeah.
say.
But that's the thing. When I did this, I didn't have that at all. It just I completely embodied that mindset without even like having to. I didn't have to change anything. The mindset sort of like just wrapped itself around me
Well,
because I was so motivated now to
well,
improve.
let me ask you this: how did you feel when you lost the World Cup game?
I felt awful.
Yeah. So those were the pain from that was the catalyst. So like usually, let's
Mhm.
take somebody they didn't have that experience. The pain will come from just that latter session. So you already experienced such an insane amount of pain. Not only did you just completely shatter who you thought you were, which is one of the three hardest things for
Mhm.
people to do. If you didn't know, so that's why it's very hard for people to do what you did. Not just in Mons, obviously, because this is not Mons specific. I'm sure you were doing it in other areas of your life. Um, but it's very hard for us to look ourselves in the mirror and be like, I'm not who I thought. I mean, top three uh, things we like. I'm trying to really give context to how hard that was. So that's why your ego was like, oh no, you didn't really lose. I mean, whatever the rationalizations were
Yeah, he was literally trying to tell me that like, oh, it's fine. It was just luck. You
Right.
you didn't lose.
Right. You literally didn't lose. Like it was imaginary. You're dreaming. I
It was almost trying to tell me that. It was very comical, and that's why it was just so absurd that I noticed it, and I hadn't really noticed that before that my brain was trying to do that.
oh yeah.
I
Oh,
guess none of the others were such high stakes.
boom. It took something you really wanted and partly what you thought you could get. You know,
Yeah, so I thought I deserved it.
yes, and you didn't, which is a tough pill to swallow. Like you weren't good enough. Um, and that's a blow to your pride, right? Especially if you consider
Hmm.
yourself someone who's capable. Um, Players like that, if you consider yourself a capable person, um, when the evidence doesn't back it up, you have two options: point the finger at the thing, right? Oh well, it's luck, blah blah. Blah. Or you go, man, need to improve. But that part hurts. So that's what I was saying. The pain part came before the latter. So at that point, you had already experienced so much pain from just the facing who you actually are that by the time you got to the point where you're like, I just want to learn,
Hmm.
it wasn't even, as you said, it engulfed you. Um, by then, the pain from that, you're like, I never want to have that happen again. So anything after that was just pure upside. So it makes sense that you didn't perceive a loss after that painful thing as anything but just, oh, okay, great, I learned something new, because it's like I am never having that happen again. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
I never want to recognize in myself like not being able to make the UK team or whatever at that point. Because I obviously lost the tryouts, so that wasn't happening anymore.
Yeah.
But whatever your drive was, maybe it's like I'm approved and I don't know.
Yeah, it was. It was just that like I consider myself as like such a good player, but like my ego is telling me, "Oh, I'm so good.
Mm-hmm.
You're 11-2 in like the Premier League,
Mm-hmm.
and everything's going well." And like this was the time when Devin had a bunch of people that were like all like 3,000 credits in the Premier League, so it was like 20 something players,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, I wasn't like the one of the managers,
Mm-hmm.
but I was sort of like the person that was like preparing and
Mm-hmm.
like playing games with everyone and like critiquing teams and stuff. But like
Mm-hmm.
alongside Devin, I was kind of like the most active at like I'd probably be playing like 10, 15 games a day with like all of these people, just like preparing them and like
Mm-hmm.
changing up their teams and things like that. And all of that kind of just like boosted my ego thinking I was so good.
Yeah.
And I was like a big fish in a small pond, I guess. And then it just
Very small.
was all shattered.
Very, very small pot. Uh, Especially considering the academy is meant for newer players. It's not completely, but it's the place where a new player can get access
Hmm.
to the best of the best. There's nowhere else you couldn't get access to a Oxafox or a Devin or a Empo or me or Blunder pops up, Joe. Like there's nowhere else you could
Yeah.
where all those players are in
And I
one
think
place.
that's so powerful in life in general. And I'm looking back at it, and that was what you were to me,
Mm-hmm.
not just in Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
Because everyone in like the self-improvement niche talks about finding some sort of mentor.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so difficult to do that because where would you even find them?
Right.
And for me, I found him in a Pokemon Discord, right?
You and God knows. I mean, again, that's I try not to disclose messages because I get messages from all kinds. But it's been over the years in the academy, man. Um, your story is one of God knows how many, but the circumstances are obviously different. Sometimes it's dark as suicide. Sometimes it's just something simple as
Yeah.
dealing with a fear of rejection or something. But um, it's super
For me, it
rewarding.
was just figuring out what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And it was that like I think this was I don't actually remember specifically why I started talking to you about all of this stuff. I think it was I saw a similar chat in
Just for
like your
jam.
Just for Jam chat,
Uh.
and I just kind of chimed in, and then it just sort of like you'd have so much time for people,
Mm-hmm.
and you'd go into so much detail that I'd sort of like message you when I wanted to figure something out for myself, and I just felt a bit lost,
Mm-hmm.
and you would just be like, I feel like you just knew the answers already, and you just directed me somewhere else.
Well, I'd ask you a lot of questions. Even
Mhm.
if I could tell you, it's just I don't know if you recall the point where and this was a huge part in your development because and this might have been after the learners, uh, where I'd say a lot. We're all fools, right? Where you're a fool, right? And
Mhm.
and and that started to feel good to recognize because you don't know how, like, you truly don't know what you don't know, and in every
Yeah.
sort of new experience, failure, whatever, is like, holy shit, I was an idiot. I thought I knew some shit until that new insight, and you're like, it's kind of sort of an exciting feeling, like, man, I really don't
Yeah.
know what I don't know. um
It is, and it's a weird thing that you can reframe that like because it's sort of an existential dread initially,
mhm.
and you can reframe that to be like, wow, it means I have so much room to improve. It means
Yes,
I'm not stuck here.
yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that in particular because um well, before I say that, well, what is when did you start to realize? Because you went through that. You went through that huge surge, and you said that's where everything things started changing for you. So, what exactly did you notice start to change after you shattered your ego, so to speak, and was like, whoa, like from that, I my entire result circumstances, all this thing I've been aiming for this whole time, like, just this insane, almost unnatural breakthrough came about, right? So what exactly came from that, and how did that transition offline?
I mean, well, I shattered my ego in one area,
Mm-hmm.
and that opened my eyes to all of the other areas where my ego is just like suffocating me, right?
Mm-hmm.
I realized that in essentially every area of my life, the same thing was true.
Mm-hmm.
And this just filled me with like the same, like, it's just a sense of like gratefulness
Mm-hmm.
that you've realized that. And you're like excited
Mm-hmm.
that you can now change that
Mm-hmm.
because you were stuck there. Like when your ego is, it's like constricting you, you're stuck, you can't move.
Yeah.
And as soon as that goes, there's no limit to what you can do.
Yeah.
And that was sort of what I realized. And that's when I realized that all of the skills, I might have realized this earlier to a degree, but this is really where I realized that the same skills that apply to the Pokemon game, like the learner's mindset
Mm-hmm.
specifically, and like dropping your ego,
Mm-hmm.
that's applicable to every single aspect of life,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
just everything. And this is, it was, I think it was a couple months after that I started my business, and like I started developing it and planning it and stuff. It took a long time
Mm-hmm.
just because of like a bunch of setbacks and things like that. Um, and just everything sort of improved from there. I mean, I know that one immediate effect of this, which was like about a week after. Um, so I've always had quite bad social anxiety,
Yeah.
and this was something that I had always like struggled with.
Mm-hmm.
And this was when it kind of gave me the inspiration to improve it
Mm-hmm.
because I'd seen so much improvement in the results in one area from improving like the learning.
Mm-hmm.
I applied the same tactic, and what I ended up doing was I would go to university parties
Mm-hmm.
like sober and alone
I
to talk to people and practice.
I did the same
And that's what
back
I
in the
did
day.
for months.
Yeah. No, I resonate. I don't. It's funny. I don't. Well, you kind of know now. You in particular, but um, the social skills, women side of things. I actually have quite a few. Man, I have a story. I don't know if that's I can share that, but uh,
You might have to tell me at the end.
well, I mean, in the sense that I could probably give an overall, but I'm saying that because, in us doing this, there are so many, there are so many people who have gone through what you're talking about, but it's just in different areas. You're happening to
Mhm.
describe different areas that it impacted, and so you mentioning the social side made me think of someone who, and the reason I'm saying I don't want this, I might have him on. But long story short,
Mhm.
did the boot camp, and to give some clarity on what has happened to Theo and the guy I'm about to tell you is, you know, if you're familiar with what I've been sort of talking about lately, I've been talking about a concept called "You Are the Avatar." It's a book that's coming out, which essentially teaches you how to leverage any competitive game to improve your offline life. So it's not Pokemon specific. It frankly has nothing to do with Mons. Um, but it essentially teaches anybody how to alter their brain using a video game and then having those effects benefit them offline. So what Theo did was he did something that was technically no risk, meaning learning these lessons through Pokemon. So there's nearly nothing to lose if you do this horribly or mess. There's no risks. There are no real stakes, but the effects are real. The alterations in your brain are real, and so what'll happen is, so let's say that 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 alteration or realization Theo had um, about Mons literally changed. Like, imagine right now, whoever is listening, sitting in your chair, every time you have a thought, your brain is making let's put this in layman terms, like little brain muscles, right? It's like doing a curl, and every time you do a curl, your muscles get bigger and stronger. So every time you keep thinking in a particular way, your brain's doing brain bicep curls, and it's getting stronger and stronger. And just like a bicep, if you work it so damn much, it's gonna get huge, strong. It's gonna be very difficult. You can't just decide tomorrow, I don't want a big bicep anymore. Okay, just disappear, right? It's not gonna happen like that. You have to stop training it for it to go away. And so similarly with the brain, if you think in a particular way, for example, I am this amazing person and I don't need to learn anything new, and sort of that fixed mindset thing that I described I had, and Theo was having, that self-image ego is ingrained in you, and
It's not just Pokemon, it's everything.
yes, and you
Across everything.
and it's coloring how you view every area of your life, because you only have, and I think this is the punchline, you only have one brain, guys, like only one. So that is controlling your perceptions in everything you do. So if your brain gets altered in one thing, for example, it could be fitness, it could have been any game, it doesn't matter the game. That's what I've been trying to explain to people. The game alters the player, and the player alters the game. So your player, referencing your brain, when Theo's brain changed, he could not look at the other areas of his life the same way. It was impossible. Unless he just was in denial.
And that's the best way to put it, that I couldn't physically look at them the same way. Is that I either had to completely ignore everything, but it's hard to explain, but it's that you see something, you can't become naive again.
Yes, yes, that's exactly it. Like, let's use a different analogy or a different example of, let's say, somebody who was overweight, lost all the weight, and is now in shape. That is a different game. Same principles, literally the same principles, no matter what game. There are laws to these things. That's why it doesn't matter. I hear people all the time, man, the same stuff happens in Smash Bros. The same. It's because they're different expressions of the same thing. but the fundamental principles are the same. In basketball and soccer, all of this is not new information. It's not my information. So all I'm doing it is translating it into Pokemon so that you guys can use it and benefit from it in other areas, which is what's happening with Theo building his business and being fit and applying it to social anxiety. But it's the same thing. Now, why do I do it like that? Because I couldn't reach you otherwise. If I gave you the book that I learned, the hundreds of books and years of study to learn how to know this at a core level from both experience.
Because I would have never found you on YouTube.
Never.
I would have never found you anywhere.
I mean, not just found me, you wouldn't have listened. Like, there are people out there who talk about the same stuff, but you have to have an interest first, and they could not have gotten to Theo. Like, they wouldn't have gotten to you. You wouldn't want to listen, and maybe the packaging was boring or whatever. So the point is almost to trick you into learning stuff that you could technically learn elsewhere from just reading a bunch of books.
But it also tells you that you actually need to improve, because I wasn't even aware that I needed to. I wasn't aware that there was anything wrong with me,
Mm-hmm.
Not wrong, but anything to improve upon. And I didn't realize that I could. And that reframing the mind was it just shattered everything and changed everything for me in basically one moment,
Mm-hmm.
which is just crazy when I look back at it. It was sort of one moment that changed everything.
And it was fucking Pokemon.
Yeah, of all things, right?
But that's I mean, I already made videos on this. You guys can go watch those on on why Pokemon is not for children. Blah 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 blah. Specifically competitive Pokemon. The in-game stuff you can say, but competitive Pokemon is very complex. But the point is, it doesn't matter the game. It could have been chess. It could have been basketball. It could have been martial arts. I guarantee you'll hear them say the exact same things in every game, or say some version of the game teaches me life. Or what they're saying is the laws that cause me to succeed in this area of life apply in other areas of my life. That's literally what they're saying. What I had to do.
I mean,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I used to play Fortnite competitively as well a few years ago, and I found it crazy that when the game died down, pretty much everyone that was famous and streaming or like incredibly good at the game instantly became jacked.
Mm-hmm.
They all went to the gym, all of them collectively.
Mm-hmm.
They all switched, and I just found it so interesting, because that was the same time that like my best friend started the gym that instantly stopped Fortnite.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
It's just that it's the same like endless practice,
Mm-hmm.
and you've trained your mind to value that,
Yes.
because that's the only way that you can improve in this game. And now you've like lost the medium in which you're doing that.
Yes.
You want to find a new medium to like practice and improve on.
And that's a great transition into the fact that and this is very common. Before I do that, I'll give the brief story because I know it was a lingering thread. The parallel between you and someone else, in particular with the social skills, and I want to hear more about that. But I had someone come to me for the boot camp. In the boot camp, a lot of times the issue, similarly to you, people think they come to me because they need skill improvement, and I do give some. It's a 4-week training, depending on what I notice you're lacking. But 99% of the time, it's a player issue. Player references your brain, who you are as an individual, who Theo is, who Bob is, who Jimmy is, online, off. Who are you at the core? That's usually the issue. And so what we work on over that time is implementing the correct thinking patterns, the correct upgrading your player, so to speak. And when your player gets upgraded, your game gets upgraded. That's what happened to you. Your player got upgraded and you jumped 400 points. You didn't get any new skills. Not one.
It was all the same skills.
Not one new skill. And Maverick, that's what's happening to him. While it wasn't as in depth, I tweaked his player a bit and he said,
Mhm.
"Screw it, I'm gonna apply it." And he was what 1,700 a week ago, and got to as high as 2,100 in number two.
That's insane.
He didn't think he could do that. That was a what? It's a 400 point jump, and he just got back to the game from a break. He was gonna stop at 18 something because he thought that was the peak of his potential, and he managed through just not stopping after he hit his peak, identifying with your results, all that. That's a whole different conversation. And through just not stopping, got to 2,100. He had no idea that was possible. So similarly to what you did, I mean, you didn't think you'd get as high as almost 2,000. You probably thought you'd do better. But if I told you 24 hours before you're going to jump to 2,000, you'd be like, you're
Yeah,
crazy. Right? So that's how powerful I'm saying it's. And I'm really hoping people get that these are not coincidences, nor happenstance, or a lucky run. These are cause and effect. Points are effects. The cause is the player. And so when I did the boot camp, and this is super common, actually, whenever we fix the player, it's very common that people either lose interest in mods, or they stop
hmm
playing, or they reduce the amount they play significantly. And the reason is,
that's what happened with me as well.
and that's why I'm bringing this up, because I want to hear what happened, like specifically. Because what people realize is Mons was a vehicle for them to. It was an extension of the issues that they were having offline, and so they want to feel successful, good, competent, and this was just an expression or a medium to get that feeling. And when you do the deep dive work that we do in the boot camp, and you get to the root of that, and they realize, oh shit, this has nothing to do with Mons. And I can see in all these other areas of my life where this is coming up, and the interest just goes away. Not because they're trying to stop. It's just that, oh, this was just a medium to fix my self-esteem issues. And now that I no longer have that, because my player got upgraded, ego got destroyed, losing is good, all those stuff has been installed. Sometimes they dive even deeper into Mons, but a lot of times they just go, okay, dang, I didn't even realize I didn't. And so this one particular case, we did like I think 2-3 different boot camps on different topics. So from Pokemon, did the deep dive, realized, oh shit, Mons isn't the root of the thing. And then we got to the real root, and that's where, we did actually a boot camp specifically around social skills, women, all that. An area that I think it might be, I don't know. It might be going toe to toe with Pokemon as far as my knowledge base, because I have done a lot of that offline, but I don't ever talk about it because it's not relevant to Mons. So, but
I mean, you'll also probably get me when I first started thinking that's another way for you to like be arrogant, right?
right, like okay. I mean, I want to help. I want everybody to do great. So I mean, it's whatever to me, right? Yeah. But if people reach out
Mhm.
about it, I'd always share the information. But it's not something I talk about, so very few people know. Now, this guy said something throughout our boot camp, and when we did the deep dive, that made me realize that's an area that is big for him. So I kind of hinted at it. And I was like, okay, if that's an area that you really want help with, then I got you. And so initially it wasn't gonna be a boot camp. I was just like, it was a cool guy. It was another mentee of mine, and
But you ended up having so much demand, it was a boot camp.
yeah, I think I ended up having like a 3 hour call with him to address it, and he then ended up after that just doing another boot camp completely, but on that in particular. And long story short, again, this is the part where I was like, I don't know if I want to share, but let's just say he got a lot of success. Like a week later, literally a different guy, man. I'm gonna see if he wants to come on. That's the fucking story. Like he literally is a different person. He said like typing. He's like, man, like I'm getting models now, and like that was one of the
Jeez.
craziest in like 3 weeks. and it's the first time I ever done that with somebody I didn't have in person. So
Wow.
it was a learning experience for me too, because like,
I think that might just be more impressive than my story.
nah, because I mean you're building a 90 grand a year business in like a couple months of releasing. That's insane, and your social skills got a lot better. So yours applied to a lot of different areas. They're all great,
Mm,
but I just mentioned that because you mentioned the social skills thing, and
yeah.
it's when you change the player through mods, you can't help but change every other area of your life. So I want to hear you mentioned how it improved the gym part, and then you were kind of alluding to the social skills and the business. So what did you notice after that breakthrough? Can you hear me? I can't hear you.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, I'm just thinking for a second. I think it was just that there were things that I'd never realized or like had been ignoring
Yeah.
that I didn't realize I wasn't good enough at. Like the social skills. So I think a lot of it was like the awareness of that. And I've always been like a competitive person. And you were mentioning like how people stop playing Pokemon as much.
Mhm.
So I don't really think was able to compete in like the real world
Mhm.
at that time. I think it was like I was a competitive person, but like defeated in a way.
Yeah.
And what a lot of people do when they're in that situation is like retreat to video games or some other
Yes.
escape.
Yes.
But then because I'm competitive and it's in my nature, I then found like a small pond,
Mhm.
you know,
Yep.
to like improve it. And as soon as I did that and I became like the big fish, it was like, right now I'm off to the big, like the ocean.
Mhm.
It just kind of, it was almost like my redemption arc, right? That I was like defeated in the real world. And then
Mhm.
when I realized I could do it, it gave me like, it made me realize that I could do it. And it made me realize what I had to do and that I was ignoring the things that I had to do to improve.
Mhm.
And I've always wanted to be successful.
Mhm.
Like ever since I was really young, it's been like my goal.
Mhm.
And I was just like completely ignoring that whole side of me.
Mhm.
And as soon as that happened, it was like, it wasn't just the ego that shattered in Pokemon, it was all of these egos at the same time that was like, oh my God. It was just everything became clear. It's like, it wasn't necessarily clear of what I was going to do,
Mhm.
but it was clear that I was going to do better in like the real world and I was going to make it.
Mhm.
And I think that was the main thing that it wasn't necessarily that it inherently improved all of my abilities.
Mm-mm.
It was that it gave me the direction.
The clarity.
And I think that's, yeah, I think that's sort of the same thing that happened with Pokemon, that I wasn't, like my baseline skill level didn't change,
No.
right? Because it couldn't just from a mindset change, really.
Right.
But what did change was my ability to learn and improve on the mistakes.
Mm.
And I think that's exactly what corresponded to the changes in my own life, that I could now learn from everything that happened to me. And I could like reframe the things in the same way as like losing is good. I
Mhm.
could reframe those things. I mean, I've got to the point now where like even if I have like something bad happen to me in my life,
Mhm.
or like there was a girl I was interested in that just fell apart.
Mhm.
And afterwards I said to myself, completely believing it, that that is the best thing that's ever happened to
Of
me.
course, it is. You'll know in 2 months why, or however long it'll take. But you'll look back and be like, "Oh, thank God." Um.
Because you realize the mistakes that you made
Yes.
and you're like, it's like complete, it's the exact same situation in like a smaller degree. Like it's not quite as clear,
Mhm.
but it's the same situation as losing that World Cup game
Mhm.
and having to face the fact that you made mistakes. And when you willingly face them, well, you can improve on them. And that's when you realize that these bad things that happen to you are sometimes the best things that can ever happen to you.
Mhm. And what you just said is super cliche. However, it feels profound. It is profound and cliche. Cliches are cliches because they were profound and then they got said over and over till they became
Yeah.
cliches. And so by the
I mean, it's hard to say it without people understanding it. It's like one of those things that you'll believe it when you see it and you'll realize how
yes,
incredible it is.
yes, because I mean, if you think about 2 plus 2 is always 4. No matter how many times you spin it, no matter, the answer is 4. So the truth is the truth is the truth is the truth. And you're always going to come back to the same conclusion. And all I'm doing is giving it to you in a different, through a different vessel. So losing is good is the same thing. Is nothing new from a truth standpoint, but I have to teach that or introduce people to that in a way they'll embrace it. Versus here's this book you could read on da 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 da. It's like, okay, well,
so we talked about this a little bit right before the podcast,
right,
which is that what you're doing is giving people specific actions to take, which then internalize that belief, as opposed to just saying the belief of losing is good. If you can learn from your mistakes, then you're
right,
going to do amazing.
right.
Because that's the most cliche thing ever. But if you can say you will get better if after every game, what mistake did you make? And inherently in doing that, you're internalizing the belief that your mistakes are good, and even in losses, you've made a victory.
And then that'll go into other areas of their life because their brain is being altered moment by moment. Every loss that they go, huh? And that feeling starts to reduce. Oh, I used to feel horrible when I lose. Now I'm like kind of excited. Like, oh, shit. And then that's going to start. Oh, shit. I'm back in the gym.
I mean, I'd get so angry when I lost sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like angry, like viscerally angry
Oh, that's super
at
common.
the world, at myself, at everything.
That's had nothing to do with Pokemon. It had nothing to do with Pokemon. And it had everything to do with Pokemon. That's the beauty of it. Like, that was just...
It's the player.
It's the player. Every time. Every single time. You said something great when you got to the... And I've mentioned that it's a cliche because it's funny. When we're saying these things, it sounds so, like, profound because you have experience to back up the cliche. But when people are listening, that's the difference between embodied knowledge and articulated knowledge, right? It's sort of like the analogy I use or a metaphor or whatever. I could tell you how to ride a bike, right? That's articulated knowledge.
It won't really help you.
You can't ride a bike though. You could also ride a bike and you can't tell me how. Meaning you can't articulate it. You don't know how. That's usually what happens whenever you have like one friend who's great socially and you ask them what they do and they go, oh, just be yourself. They have embodied knowledge, they just can't articulate it. And vice versa, you can have somebody who watches all the social videos on earth and has articulated knowledge but couldn't actually take over a situation socially to save his life. So when you have both and those get merged through experiences, then you're very dangerous, like in a good way, obviously, and it could be in a bad way too, depending. But then you're like, I have the knowledge, which people think is what knowing means, and then you have the embodied knowledge, which is the how to. I can actually do it. I can actually ride a bike. So then at the end, you're going to say the same conclusion. Just be yourself. Because that is the truth. That's actually the answer. The secret to being good with women is just unapologetically being yourself. That is the actual truth. Punchline. But if you don't have any point of reference, any knowledge, any experience, that's not of any use to you.
Yeah. I mean, that's another thing that I said right before the podcast, that there was something that Jordan Peterson said of like aiming for the highest good. And it's like, sure, that makes sense, but it doesn't really change anything for me. It's not solving my problems. And as soon as I went around and like figured everything out for myself, it was like maybe like 6-12 months later, I came to the exact same conclusion. I'm like, wow, that makes total sense now. It's the same words, but they have a completely different meaning because you actually understand what they mean. You've seen it for yourself.
Experience, such a beautiful thing. Such a beautiful thing. That's why I always try to get y'all to grab a battle, because only through that experience can like you kind of touched on that earlier, right? You saw my video. Oh, this guy made a bad play, but you lacked the experience Probably lack the knowledge
Hmm.
too. But even if I explained it to you, you might not have landed until you had the experiences. Like, oh, okay. Here's a situation.
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought if you explained it, I would have thought it's sort of you defending it, right?
Right.
I don't think I would have understood that that situation would have happened
Right. Right.
because for you to understand that, you have to say that that's not just a specific play that can play out. That's like game changing.
Yes.
It's like if you say, "Oh, he could have gone to Ferrothorn," I'd be like, "Yeah, he could have, but why would he have?"
Right. You think you try to refute the actual scenario versus the principle,
Yeah,
but you don't have the experience to get a principle because a principle is something that occurs every time. It's a
yeah.
law.
I mean, I can't like distinguish between each scenario. I can't say that if he goes Ferrothorn, that's a bad for you,
Right.
right?
Right.
And I don't know why he would do that. It's sort of like a you don't understand the subcontext of the whole game enough.
Right. Which is the principle part. That's the same word as sub. Like it's the fundamental laws
Mhm.
that cause you to be successful at this in Pokemon specifically. So it's like once until you get enough experiences, like that's what you're learning now. And this is, man, I'm super excited. One, that you're so young, like at 19. I'm like getting this, having this click this early is, man. I've done a lot, but if I knew this at 19, now I feel like the old guy that says I'm not even a decade older than you. Uh, I think I'm what, maybe 7 years older than you. But I was like, okay, if I knew this and got it, because it didn't really land until I think maybe I was like 23. Not even, I probably grasped it, but like, I would argue it didn't even really land in a major way until like 2 months ago. Uh, and that's me struggling with my vice of getting distracted um, and stuff like that, like without even realizing it, distracting myself with women in particular. And I'm like, why do I always do this? And I thought, well, getting all this positive reinforcement, why not, right? I can balance both, all the stuff I have to do, and then I realized that was coming from a unhealthy place. Long,
Is that where you said a message about searching for fulfillment
right,
in particular?
right, right. I
And it's not fulfilling, it's just satisfying in a different
Well,
way.
it's
It's like
it's
instant
it's
gratification,
pleasure.
right?
Pleasure and
Yeah,
fulfillment are
that's
different
the word.
emotions. Yeah, that's what I realized. I was like, okay, the short term gratification from the ego boost and the you know like, I'm acting like this is a PG set from sex and all that. Like that's not.
Mhm.
I I wasn't getting anything, and I noticed it. I just didn't have any incentive to stop until a particular painful experience, similar to how you had the ego drop of the defining moment in the World Cup loss, and you look back and you're like, man, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. In that moment, I felt like shit. Made a poor decision. Long story with that, but felt horrible. I mean, horrible in that moment. And in that moment, I would have said, man, I should have done this instead, meaning correct it. Sort of like how you wish you should have made the better play, but had you made the better play, you wouldn't have gone through that process. Meaning, if you
Yeah,
had won, you're like, dang, thank God I lost, because I like who I am now
yeah.
is your business. It's
Wow.
like, holy shit, thank God I lost. So that's how I
Yeah,
feel.
if I had won that, God knows where I'd be. Nowhere near where I am now from one game.
Right. That from one game. I love how you said that. And the beauty is that one game we never know when it's gonna be.
Mhm.
But if we run from the games, you could have been like, I don't want to play World Cup because I don't want to challenge the possibility of me losing. So there is a good thing in that you actually tried, because you could have been like, well, you know, that's not even for me, when really you're just afraid you might lose. So you wouldn't even attempt in the first place.
I think this is where people say that the opportunities are all around you and you just have to take them.
Mm-hmm.
That you have to notice them and you have to take them. That I could have avoided that. But even after losing, I still had the choice of like cowering behind my ego again, of like trying to build it back together from the pieces
In business, you're gonna go
instead
through
of
that.
seeing the clarity.
And I'm sure in building the business, you kind of alluded to some setbacks and stuff. I'm sure those principles were and are still big in driving you through, because that's a game that never ends, right? It's not like,
Mm.
unless you plan to sell it. I mean, which is fine. You're just gonna try and build something else, so it never really truly ends. Um, and those principles till death, because there are no new principles. Like, that's like saying there's a new law of gravity or new law of something. It's like, it's not new. You just didn't know it before. You discovered
You
it.
can strengthen and refine them still.
Yes.
I think a lot of what I do is refining the same information.
Yes. The greater degree of depth and understanding versus
Mhm.
searching for new truth. It's like, there is no new truth. Like, just apply the truth. That's it.
Yeah.
It's not fancy. It's not sexy. You hear all those motivational videos. That's what they're really saying, right? Discipline, discipline, discipline. It's like, you're hoping there's another answer than than
There's not.
than just fucking doing the thing you don't feel like doing in the moment. Going back to pleasure versus fulfillment, that's what I had to learn. Like, I I how do I put this briefly? I learned that because of because of talents and things of that nature, I never truly developed work ethic. Like, I mean, I thought I was working, but I never truly had discipline or work ethic in the way that it will take for me to do the things in the world that I plan to. Like, I thought that version of me was sufficient. I thought 50% of my attention to distractions, women, pleasure, impulsiveness, and 50% to work, dedication would be sufficient to be uh, a world-renowned level of what I'm trying to do with the academy. Not trying to do, what I am doing and will do on a global scale in all competitive gaming, and that's not gonna cut it. And that,
I think we kind of know this like innately.
mm,
I mean, I was recently reading um or rereading Deep Work where they talked about how Carl Jung
yes,
retreated into his tower
and walked,
and just worked straight
yeah,
for like months. And that's like it's something about it seems like so inspiring that that's what you want to do,
mm-hmm,
but then you don't ever implement that into your life. It's kind of that you know that that's what you have to do, and it's no, you know that that's what you want to
mm-hmm.
do.
Yep, deep work.
It just seems like, yeah,
No, go ahead. I was gonna say deep work. So that's something I read ages ago and never applied till now. Like, I tried to, but it's very hard, and I didn't understand the value until sort of like how you watch the video and you're like, yeah, 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 and then life punches you in the mouth and you're like, oh, yeah,
yeah. Because I watched a video right before the game, I think, or
yeah.
like a day before, 2 days before, and as soon as I finished the game, and I could see these two like futures in front of me of like rebuilding the ego or like seeing the clarity, and through the clarity I just saw like I kind of like heard your voice, like heard the words that you said in that, and I was like, whoa, it seemed way too applicable.
Yeah, and I'm glad, because those videos are of mother, like, to write that stuff was, I had to go into deep work. Actually had to apply during the pandemic. There were a
Mm.
lot of things that I had to learn about myself. So it's interesting that and that's about when, I think that's about pandemic. The academy was in 2000. Yeah, that was actually a few months before the academy started. So the
Mhm.
timelines match up, but it's super, like you talk about the fulfillment versus pleasure part, and you'll get a date. Like, right now, this is just intellectual understanding for you. And you'll have experiences where you're like, oh, that's what jam meant. Um, oh, and somebody listening right now may be resonating more deeply because they're like, oh, but what you'll come to realize is that reaching for the candy bar when you know you're supposed to be not bulking,
Pussy.
cutting, right? And you go on, it's just one, right? And
Yeah.
you those impulsive, oh well, I'm just gonna watch some porn. I know I said okay, it's just one. Okay, I'm just gonna, and those I'm just gonna's reaching for the impulsive pleasure, because the pleasure is one form of emotion that's important. Um, or happiness is what we usually call that, happiness, right? I'm feeling happy. Um, but
See, I've done a decent bit of research into happiness lately, and it kind of seems like there's not much in the world that can actually make you happy. It's sort of a like an amalgamation of like other emotions,
mhm.
of like gratefulness and like pleasure and peace and things like that is what actually constitute happiness. So people who search for happiness are kind of searching for the wrong things, I feel like. So that's sort of why I do sort of identify with what you were saying about the like fulfillment and pleasure.
Well,
But
happiness. The thing about what you're saying is that happiness, that word, it's sort of like the word smart. If you try to actually
yeah,
define smart, if you Google it, it's not really, a like, oh, you're smart. Usually people define smart by just referencing a different word, like, oh, you're intelligent, right? But you're not saying what smart is. You're just telling me what intelligent
mm,
is. So what does it mean to be smart? So it's sort of like smart is as you said, an amalgamation of a bunch of different traits. Um, Happiness is like that, but it's used interchangeably with pleasure, and it's used
mhm.
interchangeably with fulfillment, and those are two different.
Yeah,
Happiness is really what people say when they feel good, but the thing about feeling good is you have the joy version, you have bliss, you have fulfillment, you have pleasure. They're different ways, they're different
yeah,
scales of feeling good, but then you kind of jam it all into the word happiness. So then, if you're saying, "Man, I am really happy right now because I don't know, hooked up with that girl you always wanted," happy might like that's, and then I'm like, "Man, I'm really happy right now. I'm doing really meaningful work." We're probably not experiencing the same thing, but
yeah.
we call it happy. I might be trying to say I'm really deeply fulfilled or satisfied. You might be saying something more akin to like
Euphoria.
euphoria or something like a more short term feel good
Yeah.
sort of feel, whereas more the fulfillment from the work is more long term, sustainable, maybe not as intense, but sort of a humming in the background.
Mhm.
Bliss.
I mean, it's something that I've noticed distinctly about euphoria,
Mm-hmm,
like not necessarily from like pleasure itself, but from euphoria, which is kind of like an exaggerated version of that.
mm-hmm.
That as soon as you start to identify with that and start to try and hold on to it, it sort of goes
Yeah.
dark. And it turns into a negative emotion.
Or you.
It turns into or it turns into like um like disgust or anything like it turns into so many other emotions that are all negative.
Well. Think about it's actually not even emotion that turns negative. Let me ask you this. Let's say that you were euphoric and you're trying to cling to it. What would you do when the emotion? What do you think you would do if the emotion starts to lessen?
Yeah, I mean that's sort of like weaning yourself off a drug,
Right,
right? It's like a lower baseline.
right. And so if your drug, the high from your drug is lessening, what would you do?
Try and take
Try
more.
to take more. So whatever the drug that's because euphoria is a effect. So it's usually an effect from something you did or something you're doing. And if the effect is lessening and you want more of it, you go back to doing more of the cause. Now, that's where it might get unhealthy because the cause might not be something that's supposed to be all the time. So if you're eating a donut and you're like, this is the greatest donut of all time, you know, horrible example, but you get the idea. You're like, I need that feeling all the time, but the donut is not as awesome the next time. You're like, I need three. And then over time, that becomes maladaptive and turns into something like a negative emotion, as you're saying. Whereas fulfillment, I've found to have there's no amount of, for example, what you're describing to me now, the transformations within yourself, the things that people have messaged me. No, I have not found that, maybe, I'll speak for myself, the point to where that is like, I'm tired. I've just helped too many people, and I've, it's starting to backfire on me. The world is getting a lot too much better because we're helping each other. Like, I have not found the limit to the depths of fulfillment. Like, just how grateful you can feel when you know you're positively impacting the world. And then hearing somebody describe how you've positively impacted them. And you'll learn it too as you start to get testimonials for your supplements. And you'll be like, holy shit, that feeling. It's nothing.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know what I'm talking about from when you helped people in the academy.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of what I was alluding to with the happiness, that I think, because this is like a combination of so many different things, but what you should be focusing on is like gratefulness and like fulfillment. Yeah. So like finding your goal, your mission, and aligning yourself with that, and actually doing the work. And when it comes to doing the work, it's the same as Pokemon.
Yes.
It's the same skills.
Yep. And
just to tie that all in a nice knot.
I'm actually curious now. So you left university, which is important to note and get into the story of that, because you can, if you want to, you can mention the convo we had coming to that conclusion and all that, depending on how much you feel like the context is necessary. So you decided to leave university and take the risk into starting your own business. It's funny if you you kind of look back. It's like, okay, son, why did you decide to? Well, it all started from Pokemon, Dad, and it's like, he's like, what? Okay,
that would be a funny story, wouldn't it?
That would probably wouldn't bode very well, but yeah. So getting to the point where you're like, man, should I continue this? Should I not? And now, how are you feeling day to day, having to do the work in building a business versus, I think you might have to give some context, because we had a lot of conversations about me questioning you about what your real motivation was, because the being successful is a underlying theme, but it was the place it was coming from before the business, when you were you might have had to be, but the reasons were different, and we had a lot of conversations and a lot of reflection on where your desire for success was coming from before, and now I can tell in just everything you're doing, it's not coming from the same place anymore. So yeah, just a lot of different questions, but I think you understand. If you don't, then ask me to clarify.
Yeah, so I'll say a little bit of a backstory. When my ego was shattered, that was kind of like my unplugging from the matrix. That before that, I'd pretty much only sought pleasure, or like sought out pleasure. And then at this point, I realized that there was more meaning that I could find in other places from applying this same like technique. And then it was just sort of, but now what do I do? It was like my eyes were opened and I knew that I had to do something, but I just kind of had no idea what I actually wanted to do. And I just started exploring as many different things as I could. I mean, I'd be doing research into everything, like psychology, neuroscience, pharmacology, like general like bodybuilding, and like like the gym and kinesiology. The list keeps on going on for
Mm.
another, add another 10, 15 things onto there,
I remember.
like coding, everything. And I just had no idea. It was just sort of a search for meaning because I realized that that's what I needed now. And it was difficult because I never knew that I needed it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was almost like blissfully ignorant.
Mm-hmm.
And now it was like, it felt like something was missing.
Mm-hmm.
And starting the business initially didn't like fix that. It was, I had so many plans for what I wanted to do with the business. So essentially, I'm trying to make the best formula that I can to help people because other companies kind of just make crap products for like profit. And then I had so many other ideas for other like places we could expand into, like men's fashion, jewelry. I was kind of like trying to put people on the same path as me in a way of like
Mm-hmm.
self-improvement, of like, this is the hub, this is where you go
Mm-hmm.
to transform yourself, like for everything you need, for like skincare, for fat loss, for like general health, for your
Mm-hmm.
fashion, for like improving your physique, right? But it still felt kind of empty, and I wasn't exactly sure where to get like my meaning from.
Mm-hmm.
And this just kept on going for a long time. And it wasn't until I read The Power of Now that everything changed for me because I realized that there was more to life than just meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And I figured that I can find meaning in a lot more places than I thought I could. To explain that a bit more, I think that there's no optimal way to find meaning. I think that it's sort of like if you're spending 6 months like I did, testing different things out to figure out what you're interested in, you've not looked into them enough to actually figure out what you want to do. And all of them are viable options. Maybe some are slightly better than others, but you can find it in all of them. But the underlying like knowledge that I had that it wasn't in maths, which was what I was doing at university.
Mm-hmm.
So that was where I had a lot of resistance to the course I was doing. Felt like it was just eating away at my soul in general.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was one morning I woke up and I just had the idea of leaving. It's like it had already been in my mind for a long time, but this time it was a lot like more potent. And I was like, okay, let's entertain the idea. What would I do? Writing it down, start like figuring out finances, making sure I could do it, planning out what I could do. And I'm looking here thinking, this is something I can do. And this was actually like a while after I'd messaged you about it because I was contemplating it, but I don't think it had ever been like, I don't think I was ever going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of seemed like a concept to me that like, well, this could happen in the future. I might do this. I'm not enjoying this.
Mm-hmm.
But then it was, wow, okay, I'm doing this. And it just, so I was reading a research paper today. This is like sort of similar
Mm-hmm.
about how often your unconscious mind is better at making decisions than your conscious mind.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to things like deciding which house to buy or which car to buy or which computer, anything that's complex that has a lot of variables going into it,
Mm-hmm.
then just not thinking about that in general makes you like choose a better choice,
Mm-hmm.
which I find fascinating. And I think that's what happened here, that I'd basically, without really thinking about it much, thought about it for like months. And then it just all came into like fruition at one point, and I was like, okay, I'm doing this. And after that, everything was just life changing, and every day was amazing, really. Compared to like a year ago, it's just entirely different. And I think that even though my results speak for
Mm-hmm.
themselves in terms of like my physique and um like the business and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that, I think the main thing is like the improvement to my life satisfaction in general.
Mm-hmm. And what, since life is a game, what's the cause for that effect?
I think it's just knowing that you're playing the game, knowing that you're actually winning, and you're.
But what had to
This is
change?
it's
But
a
what had to change before? You've already known this. Just you're just using it in a different game other than Pokemon. What changed in order for the effects in your life to change? So,
That's an interesting question. I've not thought of it much. I think part of it is being meticulous in learning,
mm-mm,
because before that it was
simpler than that. You already know the answer.
yeah,
It's
it was just kind of I was breezing through life, not really thinking. I was on autopilot. And then I started applying the same principles to learning everything that I could
so if
to
so when
like
you apply the principles,
towards the goal,
what changes?
everything, right?
Well, only one thing changes actually, or one person.
Yourself.
Bingo. That's the only thing that's been altered throughout this whole process. But I wanted you to come
Hmm.
to that realization yourself, which is why I asked you versus just saying it.
Yeah.
The only thing that's been changing is your player. The whole time. Everything you just described just all alluded to. And so I did this thing and then I thought about this and all you were doing was altering your brain. Literally the whole time.
Hmm.
And that's what all you'll keep doing. And that's the punchline that I want you to really get here. And I'm sure you heard a million quotes on, a man is the reflection, this man's circumstance is a reflection of himself, and all these things.
Hmm.
It's factually accurate. Literally, because you changed you're literally not the same brain that existed a year ago. Like in
Yeah.
a how you perceive the world kind of way. You're not the same Theo. That guy is not alive anymore if you in a way of looking at it. So your circumstances map to your new self. And then a year from now you'll be a greater version of yourself because that's all you're ever altering. And
Oh, I'm so excited for what the future holds.
yeah.
I can imagine myself coming on the podcast in a year, being like a millionaire and all of these things.
Yep.
Like I've won my bodybuilding contest that I've got like basically a year from now, and all of these things that I can show you like the progression,
Oh yeah.
how it keeps on
I'm
going.
super excited, man. And again, it's funny how you mentioned all the other things that you were thinking about because when because I have so many people again like yourself who have ventured out as a result of doing the player work in Pokemon, using Pokemon as the game, and have gone out and have done great things. And one of the projects that I'm working on is merging all competitive Pokemon onto one platform and having that be the premier competitive Pokemon platform on the planet. Right, so massive academy, like with the academy on roids, on roids, on roids, on roids. Same culture, same, but all colossal, with like a scaled at hundreds of thousands of people. So that's where I'm going with Pokemon, right? That's why I've been MIA. It's a big thing,
Hmm.
and in that, obviously, we'll have all kinds of different things to do with said traffic. And one of them I was thinking about, I was like, I wonder. I was like, man, to promote and help and all these things. I'm like, I'm gonna have Theo's supplement thing be like the
Hmm.
premier supplement. Oh, it's sponsored by, even if it's not actually sponsored, but you get the idea. Like the
Yeah.
the premier Pokemon player pre-workout, and then bang, but like for everybody's thing, right? If somebody was
Hmm.
making a damn, I don't know, something that's applicable that, they're making chairs. Oh, the premier chair company for all Pokemon players is, like just to
Yeah.
promote their thing, because one, first and foremost, I want y'all to succeed at the highest level, but also just sharing that abundance, uh and it's actually good, right? Meaning the
Hmm.
product is great, so I feel great promoting it, and that puts money into your pocket, into the company's pocket. It's just a win-win and
Mhm.
great product for the user. They started playing Pokemon thinking, oh, that's just all it is. And then all these offline transformations happen. There's a whole motherfucking Pokemon workout section to things. It's such, the possibilities are endless. And so that is something that I'm now just expressing it to you for the first time. But ever since you said you were starting the thing, I was like, okay, I'm going to figure out a way to have that also be promoted. So just a heads up from
That'd
there.
be awesome. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. So you were saying about the oh yeah, I was saying just basically the change in you has been the reason for the changes in your circumstances. If you really reflect
Mhm.
on all you've said, all of it has been about, so I changed myself in this way, and I read this information, then I changed in this way, then I
Yeah.
read this book and it changed me in this way, and when I changed, everything around me changed. When I changed, everything around me changed. When I changed a
Yeah.
player, the game's changed.
It all stemmed from that one moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I just started, it's kind of, I guess you could say, soul searching. And just through that whole time learning and changing. And then I kind of finally figured out what I want to do and where I'm headed. And then from there, I just sat down and I was like, right, this is it. And then it just, everything started going well.
Because you started going well
Hmm.
internally, right?
Yeah.
And
I mean, even before
yeah, go ahead.
so when I joined the server in the first place, this was around the time that I was doing the coaching calls with
Mm-hmm.
you, and I was like trying to improve at it. I went from in like my maths A level, I went from a predicted grade of like
Mm-hmm.
AAB to 3A stars in that time, and then got into like my dream university, and everything was going well. And that was just from it was the same concepts, but I didn't really understand enough about myself to know like the
Yeah.
game, right? It was I was applying the skills but to the wrong game.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And
what
now
you're talking about when you went to university? Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then it's like as soon as the ego dropped, it was almost like at the same time all the possibilities opened that wasn't the only thing I had to do. I wasn't locked into that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I was talking about before that I'm
Mm-hmm.
competitive, but I was always locked into the idea of what I had to
Mm-hmm.
do. And then I realized at that moment that because there are all of these skills that I'm lacking at, that those are all opportunities for like new improvements and new directions, as opposed to just a degree that I'm doing.
Right.
Because if there's skills, then there's new directions.
Right. Just change the game rather than
Mhm.
ruin your player because it's the only game you can play. Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, I just didn't realize there were so many games. And as soon as the ego dropped, it was like, whoa, it's all there. Every skill, every single thing that I do, it means something.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting in your journey. I've noticed a pattern of awareness being like the critical component. Like you just weren't aware. I didn't know I needed to improve. I didn't know I could.
Yeah.
I didn't know there were like it seemed to be, which makes sense why you're such a voracious reader and gatherer of knowledge. It's like, looking for that blind spot and removing it, rubbing it out, constantly
Mhm.
removing the blind spots, which gets addictive because you're like, man, I was blind. And so I'm like, I
It
never
feels
want to
like
be blind.
every 2 weeks. Feels like every 2 weeks I look back and think 2 weeks ago me was blind.
Oh, trust me, bro. I mean, I'm writing the same fucking book for a third time, like, and like it's never ending, and it's super beautiful because it's like, and it's crazy because it's like in the moment you really like right now you probably well maybe not, but like I'm like no I really got to the nitty gritty, the atomic level of Pokemon this time. Like last time I got to the molecular level. Now this is like
And then maybe in a few years you'll
right.
realize there's like
Like
another
fuck, I
level.
can't believe I'm writing another book. It's like, but this time, I mean, when I tell you, and that's probably why it took so long to get it like done, because I'm so much research and work in science and really getting this thing to the T. So I'd be shocked if, but that's just life. Like I probably will in 2 years be like, man, I could have mentioned that, and how did I not mention this? And might be not to the point where I need to rewrite it, but it's just like, dang, I can't believe I didn't realize that this was the real cause, and da 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 da. So it's almost infinite just how much you're a fool, and it's very freeing versus the self-image of I am so smart, because that
Yeah.
one causes you to block new information, because new information means stuff you didn't know before, and if there's stuff you don't know, maybe you're not that smart.
And that hurt me a lot. That was one of the things that I had to deal with a lot. When I was really young, I was like incredibly
Yeah.
intelligent. I was like reading like 700 page books at like age
Mm-hmm.
5, and I was discussing like ethics and religion and stuff with my mum at like the same age.
Mm-hmm.
I think no one had ever even like told me about anything to do with religion, and I I was a self-proclaimed atheist at 5, and I had like a valid reason for it and everything. And then I sort of lost all of that, and it was like there was this mental resistance of I'm intelligent, why am I not doing well? Why are my circumstances not reflecting my intelligence?
Yes. 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 Similar.
Because I was ignorant.
Exactly. The Jordan is a. Wait, we're not gonna go into that. But the truth is the truth is the truth is the truth is the truth. And yeah, there's a. I think Carl Jung got this or translated this from some old Greek thing, and then Jordan popularized it in modern times. But he said, "In filth it will be found." You know, what you most want to find will be
Yeah,
found where you least want to look. And
yeah,
so, typically, the place we least want to look is in the mirror. Hence, your ego being shattered. Blah blah blah. And so, 99.9% of the time, the place you least want to look is always in the mirror. Which is why every week it's like, oh, I was a fool last week. Oh man, I was a fool last week. Oh, I was a fool. That's because now you have the habit of looking where the filth is, and once you get there, bro,
mhm,
you're a dangerous motherfucker. Because now there is what can stop you when you stop fearing losing, and you stop fearing looking at your mistakes and flaws, and start viewing them as something positive. Like, how can you not? Like, it's impossible to not succeed in everything you do.
yeah,
Like, it's actually when people really, and that clicked for me again 2 months ago. It's like, oh shit, like this is action reaction. I can't keep thinking I'm above the process, which was a big blind
mm,
spot because of similar circumstances to what you're describing. While it wasn't ethics, I read, I could read maybe at 2 or so, 3, very young, and all of that
yeah,
self-image stuff came into play, and fixed mindsets, and reinforcement from outside. Oh, you're so this, you're so that, and so
yeah,
you
exactly.
don't know any better. You develop this ego, and you actually run from things that could disprove how smart you think you are. Um, and it wasn't until maybe 19. I don't remember the actual time where I started to shatter that part of me, where it's like, oh, you're actually nowhere near who you think you should be, and that goes for school, everything, right? It's just
Yeah. I mean, it's a similar story to me then, because I think it was all through high school. I would like I would teach the teachers in
mm-hmm,
maths. Like I'd correct them and like give them different ideas and like say this is a better method to do it. Just off the top of my head, it would come to me.
mm-hmm,
And I remember at the end of so like year 11 is the final
mm-hmm,
year. The end of year 10, we would sit a like full mock paper. So what we would do a year later.
mm-hmm,
And I got like 100% on all of the maths
mm-hmm,
papers with content we hadn't learned yet.
mm-hmm.
And it was like it was sort of the same God complex you talked
Right.
about, that yeah, everything's going fine. And then it was like, wait, everything isn't going fine. Why? And I just couldn't accept why.
That is you.
Yeah.
Right. Right. That's the last place you want to look. But it's so freeing afterwards, which is the funny thing. And you always know it will be when you go into filth, but you still have the
Mhm.
resistance, which is super funny to me. Like there are times where I'm like, ugh, I've accumulated filth again. I thought I learned how to not have filth, and then you develop the ego comes back in some tricky little way,
Yeah.
and you got to go back into filth, and it's never fun. You feel it in your chest when you. Well, I do it through writing, so I like
Yeah.
write out the
I
thoughts.
do the same.
I think it's the best method. Physically writing, not typing.
Hmm.
Typing has some effect, but nothing. I won't get into that, but writing is the best. Um, and then it'll purge you. It's literally a process of purging, process of purification, and that those old traits burn away, and you'll physically feel
See,
it.
what I like,
Go ahead.
and what I like about like journaling in particular, is that you can kind of you have that resistance to starting something. You're like, I know there's this issue that I need to address, and you can kind of dip your toes into it, and then you get
Yep.
dragged straight into
Yep.
it.
5 pages
And that's
later.
what I like, is that, yeah, it's that like you can kind of trick your brain like, oh, it's fine. I'm just going to talk about the outskirts of the topic, and then like 2 hours later, you're right at the bottom.
Yep. Yep. And it's funny thing is you can't stop once you start. You like
Hmm.
once you start the rabbit hole, you never just on page two. I don't want to go any. It's like if you stop and you go do something, your conscience will bother you, and it'll go. It's be
Yeah,
like, no, I need to, and it'll
I don't think I've even got to that point in the first place. I just keep on going.
right, and it's just theoretical, but you can imagine if
Mhm.
you were to stop
Yeah,
and you know the filth is there, you'll feel it in your core, and it'll eat at you and
yeah.
it'll eat at you and it'll eat at you until you complete it and shine light on it. Um, Man, Pokemon has taught me so much, more so in the sense of what you guys teach me about just how uniquely average everyone is. Right? Everybody's some version of the same three problems, and it's
Yeah.
just unique in how it's being expressed. But it's just I'm talking about gratitude, man. Um, I am into that's. I'm glad one you reached out to say you wanted to share this with everyone else. Because I
Mhm.
was thinking about doing this several times. I have so many people who've gone through this, and my own God knows what really. I don't know what the reason was. I'd have to journal on that. Part laziness, part just like the belief that nobody will actually listen because it's not the right time yet. But then I thought about when you messaged me, I'm like, who gives a fuck if it's not 100,000 people getting this particular? It just needs like, and this is how I check myself at times and remind myself. I'm like, if that was your, let's say the mindset video, I think given all the time and all the value that's in those mindset videos, I think one may have 3,000 views at most, and that's from the same people watching it over and over again.
Yeah.
So Lord knows like how many unique views that's gotten, but from those who have like the level of transformation on the long tail
Yeah.
is for me to say because it was not a million views, implying that the number of views is directly
Yeah.
proportional to the impact.
I mean, it's like scale times magnitude. It's like how much it affects each individual person times the amount of people that you
Right.
reach. But if you like share something that's like, I don't know, a cat, like a funny cat video that gets a million views, it's like that's doing nothing.
Right. Pleasure. Right.
And just one person watching your videos is doing more.
Right. And depending on who that is, right? Because we don't know the long tail of how that particular moment is going to impact you over the next 80 years, right? You could end
Yeah.
up fucking, ending world hunger. Like, we don't know the long tail. Like, the supplement thing is just your first game, right?
Mm.
For me, I thought, Pokemon and stuff, and now I'm venturing into every competitive. Like what you learned, I want every competitive gamer to get access to, because you said something very ingenious earlier that you're not conscious of. You said people escape into video games. I'm very aware of that, and I'm gonna go to where you escape to free you. That's
Yeah.
where I want to go, because let's keep it real. Like there are millions of people who are using video games to escape, and you could go, well, they should read a book. Well, they're not. So rather than,
That is hard for them to.
you said what?
It's hard for them to as well when you're in that situation, because if you're trying to accept defeat in video games and sort of sedate yourself, then the act of reading a book
Yes.
alone means that you have to have hope for the
Right.
future.
Which is,
And to have hope for the future means you have to look internally.
I mean, to have hope for the future, you'd have to first assume that you're valuable. And
Mhm.
if you've ever been depressed, or know people with depression, depression is literally the state of no future, or the assumption that the future, while coming, will be worse than now, or at least not better.
Mhm.
So, and I mean, countless people are likely depressed, seek pleasure in video games as a result of that. The players aren't healthy, therefore using, not always the case, but if we can use that medium, not try to take the medium away, or make it, or demonize it, but actually view the positive potential within it, and have this be common knowledge. That's my goal for this, to be everybody knows this. Just like how in the academy everybody's like, oh, value, blah blah blah. Those things weren't concepts before I wrote those. Like nobody knew what the pillars, knowledge, awareness, like none of that stuff existed ever. Now it's common knowledge. Oh yeah, you're just identified with your results. Oh, no. You guys don't realize how like willy nilly you're diagnosing people, but none of that existed ever.
And now you're in a situation where what you're doing doesn't exist either, trying to save people from inside the Matrix.
Right. But I can't get them out. I, I can't go to a person that's obese and give them chicken and broccoli and say, eat this and stop eating all the stuff you're eating. Right. I
Mhm.
might have to start them with a Quest bar. Right. It's less unhealthy than donuts, but it's not chicken and broccoli. And then over time, they end up with chicken and broccoli maybe 2-3 years later. But if I just,
You have to help them find it in themselves.
right. And so I'm giving people Quest bars for, I didn't try to get you to read a book. I just try to get you better at Pokemon, knowing that once the brain alterations occur and you get that goal, it can't not affect the rest of your life.
Because I find that so fascinating that I've never really seen you like promote or shill like any sort of self-improvement, but everyone seems to be going down that path completely naturally.
Mm-hmm. Never. Because I know that there are a lot of beliefs and assumptions around that stuff. Some true, some not. But the truth is the truth, and you can deliver it in many ways. They just decided to deliver it in that package. I've realized, you don't have to apply it in just that manner. You can teach people to alter their brains through things that they enjoy, not only through sort of this one method. You have to go to the gym and you have to. It's like, no, you can alter the brain. All that's required is a worthy goal, and the person has to not be sufficient in their current form. That's the only two requirements. So they will have to want the end game, and they have to be insufficient currently. And then between that,
See, and
go ahead.
that's sort of like that applies to every single thing in life, and that's kind of where meaning itself is derived.
Yes.
That to have a goal and to walk towards that goal,
Yes.
that's everything. That's a video game. That's going to the gym. That's being better at social
Yes.
situations. That's your career, your education. It's everything.
And I'm sure through your study, when you were venturing all about, you learned a lot about dopamine, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, that's that chemical that gives us that feeling. But dopamine is only released up to the goal, not when you achieve it. I think serotonin is released when you achieve it, and that's short term. But dopamine, that feel good chemical that everybody's buzzing about, is released only on the journey. Yet, if you think about how most people go about things, they want their end goal now. So
Yeah.
you get no dopamine.
I mean, people who, I think there's a study on people who have won the lottery
Mm-hmm.
and that's everything they've ever wanted. They've got all the money in the
Mm-hmm.
world and they're slightly happier at
Mm-hmm.
first. And that completely levels off to where they were
Mm-hmm.
initially. And after they lose the money, they have a lower baseline happiness level than
Mm-hmm.
before.
Sounds about right. Because when do you aim at?
They found a goal and they felt worse for it.
Mm-hmm. What do you aim at then? Right? Dopamine is only
Mhm.
released when you have a worthy goal you're working towards. So what happened to you? Let's take for example with the um, when you hit that peak, your whatever you were looking into Pokemon to achieve got satisfied in that moment,
Yeah.
and you finally got that. I've achieved the thing, and then all your motivation died.
Yeah.
So.
I don't know specifically why it was that moment. I didn't really set out a specific goal before that like laddering session.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just sort of knew when it was over. Once I hit that game, it was like I wasn't scared of playing the next
Mm-hmm.
game. And I think I actually played the next game and
Mm-hmm.
lost. And I just thought, that's done for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's over.
Mm-hmm. You've gained the lesson necessary from that. And you again, that's why I say your current business is likely just you're gonna hit that point where it's like, you know, not like the benefits not still a great business or anything like that, but you may be like, and I've done the millions, I've gotten this stuff, da 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 da. Maybe I want to venture
Yeah.
out into this business now. And you start back from ground zero, and being ground zero and having a worthy goal, dopamine all over again.
Yeah.
So, and you're not gonna feel any kind of positive emotion. I mean, not that's not true, but the kind most people are craving without getting dopamine.
Yeah.
Um, and if you're not getting dopamine, that means you don't have a worthy goal, or you're so focused on getting to the goal. I want to get to the end that the journey right now is just a means to an end, and it's an obstacle and
Yeah.
a burden and all of that. And so your perception.
And that's why I was like so moved and so changed by the power of now. Because I'd already learned to drop the
Mm-hmm.
ego and learn, but I hadn't learned to appreciate the journey and like the moments in between. So I kind of had to. I feel like that's sort of like not the three ultimate pillars, but three of the pillars that you need to like have meaning, which is like dropping your ego and like focusing on learning, but then also to appreciate the journey and the way forward.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing that I just didn't have before that book.
And it's funny because the Theo before, I don't think would have. That just shows how much your player changed to where you could be open to reading The Power of Now, because that's a very.
Yeah.
It can be a very wooey read, especially if you read it. I guess you could. I guess it would be
Yeah.
worse if you audiobooked it, because I think Eckhart Tolle actually narrates it. Um,
I believe it does. Yeah.
which I listened to the book. I didn't read it, but it's a very wooey read. Last time I listened to it, I think was during the pandemic, and it's out there if you identify with a very practical sort of materialistic sort of worldview. So while I wouldn't say that that's necessarily who you were completely before. Um, Typically, that's not the natural next step. Um, so when you mentioned and how like you're like, man, the power of now, I was like, man, he's changed so rapidly to where he actually found the power of now himself and took the time to read it, and not only took the time to read it, but actually got it, grasping it. You'll never get it fully, it's just a lifetime sort of journey, but
Mhm.
um,
I think it was just that I was trying more and more to work harder.
Mm-hmm.
This was specifically for maths that I wasn't enjoying it at all. And it was kind of I had this crazy thought that if I try and work harder and push harder, then I'll enjoy it
Mm-hmm.
more. And it didn't work at all. And that's when I was like, I probably need to start looking at other solutions. And that's where I found that.
Was it from a video, or did you just like Google something, or YouTube algorithm? What was it?
It was definitely from a video, but I'm not sure which one. I think it was just I heard it mentioned a couple times, and I had like a big reading
Mm-hmm.
list that I'd like accumulated, but hadn't really started. I think I had something like 60 books on there, and that just happened to be like
One of them.
the second one I
Okay.
chose. So the first one was Never Split the
Yeah.
Difference, and then the second one was The Power of Now.
Never split the difference is something that I been procrastinating on. So I might audiobook that today and take this as a synchronicity. But back to actually something, and this will be the final sort of punchline of the podcast, because I think we've covered mostly everything, and then after that you can, if you have anything you think we didn't cover or you want to share or whatever. But you mentioned the article about the subconscious versus conscious, and
Yeah,
that's a whole other motherfucking fuck a podcast, a lecture, um, because that's talking about misunderstood. That might be something that is like, it won't be 6, 7, 10 years from now till you actually start beginning to scratch the surface of understanding what that truly means. But as far as now is concerned, in your current level of understanding, let's assume that they're both within the brain. You have your conscious mind, your subconscious mind, or conscious brain, subconscious brain. Let's use those words for the listeners that are more material, right? Uh, you said, oh, well, the subconscious sometimes can make better decisions and such and such. Let me ask you this. This kind of ties into the Carl Jung part. Where do your ideas come from?
so I have been I this is sorry, it just reminded me of something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is completely like off topic
Mm-hmm.
now, but that reminded me. The first thing I was going to say was talking about a book that I've read and not really my own understanding of
Mm-hmm.
something, just like recalling information. It just reminded me of the quote from Good Will Hunting. I watched that a few months
Mm-hmm.
ago, where he says that like if I asked you about love, like you'd quote me
Mm-hmm.
Shakespeare, something like that. It means it's the same as what you were talking about before with like not really what were the words that you used to do with two types of understanding.
Embodiment versus intellectual understanding.
Exactly. So I don't think I've embodied any of this yet to understand it to a high degree. But from what I've seen is that your mind sort of connects ideas that you observe during you kind of have two states of like focus, which is like when you're doing something like habitual and like your mind is able to wander and stuff, it connects the different dots that you've learned from things like deep work and other parts of life.
Where do
And it
where do the
just
original
sort of does that all in the background.
where does the original thought come from?
It's a difficult question because I don't really have any idea.
Right.
I think it's sort of just like connecting, like, I think you always know information specifically, and this will just connect them in a way that you've not seen before. And they'll both come up to you at the same time. They're both ideas. And they'll just sort of
Well, where does the
I think once it goes into conscious thought is when you can elaborate on
right?
the idea and actually understand it.
So let's start with the subconscious then, and ignore the conscious, since we're saying that the idea would emerge from the subconscious. Where did the idea come from to go in the subconscious in the first place?
This is such a difficult question. I'm wondering if you're going to go in a direction of like the different types of like personality, like the ego and
No.
the id and the super ego and stuff like that.
Okay, I'll make it more simple. Where do your thoughts come from? Where does a thought come from?
I don't know.
You don't know, and
No.
that's important. I won't say anything about that, but I think a more fundamental thing that is often not considered by most people, myself included, until a couple of years, maybe even just a year ago. I don't remember when, but implicit in our things are that thoughts somehow we that come from our come from the brain, like come from the flesh
Mhm.
of the brain or something. I mean, there's no evidence to support that thoughts emerge from your brain. Your brain may be able to receive them, but we don't know where the fuck ideas come from. And we don't know where that stuff comes from. You just get a thing pop into your head. Where does that come from? And if you're saying, well, it's from other people,
I think
then where did the original?
I think from what I've read
Mm-hmm.
is that there are always a lot of ideas that come to you, just most of them you don't actually like see or observe. And then the ones that seem of significant like importance are the ones that you actually notice come
That
up.
still doesn't answer.
So I don't think that they necessarily like rise to you out of nowhere. It's that they're there, and then the ones that are of significant importance are just the ones that you notice. But it's still a question of how do they form in the first place, and I have no idea how that
Right, right. And I'll
happens.
have you go down that journey if, if there's a journey you're curious about, and everybody else listening. Um, but I mentioned that not to just to give you a random thing to consider, but you said something earlier that, well, you alluded to Carl Jung and his walks, and if you think back to the question I just asked, you kind of think about what is he doing, right? Um, Inspiration. That's something you mentioned earlier. Where did that come from? Right. Where does inspiration come from? It's not something you can control. You think it's stored.
So I actually think I have more of a grasp on that from like I guess an intuitive point of view is that it seems like something that's innate in your own nature and something that you kind of understand about yourself that's been lost. So I think it was Carl Jung again that said that people don't learn, they just remember,
Mm-hmm.
and that everything is already like known by the
Mm-hmm.
universe. So I think this is an example of when something inspires you, it's something that you know to be true, and you've just sort of like relearned that and rekindled that you notice that you see that in yourself.
Right. And then that begs the question of where did that come from? Right. And so that's the again, I just again to broaden that perspective because I think it'll be more helpful to pose that question than to not, primarily to help you understand the process that's occurring to you when you mention your subconscious or when you mention inspiration or those processes. Carl Jung, I'm assuming, got to the point where he had a grasping on what triggers certain ideas to emerge. Um, I don't know if this is unique to people, meaning like, or there's just a fundamental first principle to how inspiration or insight comes about. But some people get it through swimming, some people get it through whatever. I guess the first principle may be when your mind is in a non-thought state, meaning they're not thoughts coming in. It's just a
Yeah,
blank.
so I've read the book Hyper Focus, which talks about this a little
Right.
bit, and it's just saying it's whenever you're doing anything that's like habitual, that you've just completely internalized to the point where your mind can wander. Like when you're doing something like washing up
Well,
or you're going for a walk, anything like that.
it's hard to say if the mind is wandering because if you think about, Eckhart Tolle, for example, his mind isn't wandering; it's just not on. Right. It's just
See, I think that's a form of deep focus in a way.
that's an opinion. We don't know that. Right? I mean, you can have that
Mm.
belief. I don't really beliefs aren't something that I find particularly useful. If I don't know it, I don't know. But to make a claim that has no basis is just, it's like, well, I mean, we can state that, and I don't know what the purpose of stating that would be, but as far as I can tell, we don't know. And so that's the state of affairs with stuff like that. It's like, well, I can say it's this and that, but there's no proof that that's the case.
Yeah. See, from what I've seen in my own life, it's that when you do things like meditating, which seems incredibly similar to being present in general, it seems like exactly the same skill set, is that you're focusing your entire consciousness on a single small action, such as your breathing. And that means that there's no space for those other ideas to come to you. And that's why your mind becomes blank when you are skilled at meditation, because it's sort of like deep work. You're focused entirely on one thing. But when you're doing something like washing up, you can either use the rest of that attentional space to let it wander and let it build up intuition and other ideas, or to be completely present. Because to notice your own body and to notice your presence requires at least some attentional space, which would take away from your ability to create new insights.
Again, I can think of 3 books I'd recommend to enlighten you on what you just said, because meditation, the meditation you're talking about is the most basic level. That's the introduction, just to get somebody to not have thoughts, so focus on one thing. But presence is a state of thoughtlessness. It's not focusing on a thing. It's just quite literally presence. And I don't know if you've ever experienced it. Presence is simply awareness, no focus.
Yeah.
The focus is attention plus time. That's what focus is, a concentration of attention. Presence is just awareness, which is slightly different. So if I had to break it down, it's funny because it's actually broken down in the Pokemon book. I put it like this. So awareness, in a Pokemon sense, is just noticing what's there. Attention is a condensed version of awareness. It's like taking awareness and concentrating it a bit. Then you get attention. Then you concentrate attention and you get focus. But awareness is just being conscious. It's not applying consciousness, which is what focus is. It's just being conscious. So when Eckhart Tolle is when he was park bench, he was literally just, and when you experience it, you'll know what I mean. But it's very different.
That book on its own allowed me to reach that. That book on its own allowed me to reach presence.
So you have experienced presence, meaning a state of thoughtlessness. So did you think you were, because you were focused on something in particular?
I just think there's quite a big similarity between being entirely focused on a task and being entirely focused on your own consciousness.
Who knows? I don't have the answer to that question. From experience, it's the absence of focus rather than a focus on consciousness, because then you'd have to ask, how do you focus on consciousness, implying we know what the entirety of what it means to be conscious, right? You can only say, well, I'm aware that I'm here. I guess that would be that what consciousness is. I know I'm here. I know you're here. I know this is happening right now. Is that focus? I don't know, but I just thought that was an interesting thing, because you mentioned power of now.
I mean, you're getting into a territory I have no idea of, really.
I figured as much, which is why I formed it in the form of a question. That way, it's something that is because it's one of those things that at the right time, just like how the power of now came when it needed to, you'll hit certain plateaus in your current paradigm. You're like, damn, what is and maybe this conversation will pop back up into your head and you'll Google something, and the rabbit hole for that next phase of evolution occurs. But I don't know when that'll be. So I'd say just enjoy the presence of right now and just all the
Yeah.
amazing things that you're accomplishing. Because like it's, man, I am excited for you. I'm excited for the next 10 years. You'll only be 29. You know, uh,
Yeah.
10 years is a lot of time to fucking grow and develop and fuck up too, because you will. Can't not, but you have the right
Mm.
mentality to view the fuck up as something that's, you know, it feels like shit right now, but in 2 months, 3 months, a year, I'll be like, this is the greatest thing that ever happened to me. So
Yeah.
go ahead.
So I'm interested in your like insight on
Sure.
something. So when you go to the gym
Mm-hmm.
at the start, you like have your newbie gains. You have a lot of like the rewards like front
Yes.
loaded of a lot of what you learn. Do you think the same thing is equivalent in like knowledge work and knowledge accumulation?
What could you?
The first few years of self-improvement are going to be the most life-changing, and then after that, it's sort of diminishing returns? Or do you think that it's completely linear
Well,
and that you can like essentially infinitely improve?
I know you can infinitely improve because I mean that's a whole other conversation. But that'd be like saying, put it simply like this: because at the most fundamental level of existence, uh, nothing is at stasis, right? You know, everything is, you know, energy in motion, or you could say atomic, the atoms moving around, meaning you're like there's no true stasis. You could say, well, that's entropy, and then that's going to be the ultimate thing. We're not going to go into that conversation, but the reason that's meaningful here is that to imply that there's some sort of limit to growth. Uh, it's almost impossible to make that statement and have it be true, because that's like saying that their 1700 was your limit. How do you know? You know,
Mm.
how can you ever know that it was your limit unless you push?
I think the question specifically is like, I'm seeing so much improvement every few months that I can look back and see so much has
Yeah.
changed. Do you think that is sustainable? Is the question. Do you think that's going to continue? Do you think that there's enough wrong about you
Oh, okay.
to last like a lifetime of like linear, like
I think.
like learning about yourself
Well, I don't
linearly?
know. The way I'd look at it is less, because your life has different dimensions. So you have your family dimension, your romance, your friendships, your character, your psyche, your business. Like you have a million dimensions,
Hmm.
and what dimension a person occupies depends on what they value. So you're currently focusing heavily on the business finance dimension, or the character development dimension of your life. I don't know how much attention you're
Hmm.
devoting to the romantic part, family part.
Zero,
Right.
basically.
But that doesn't mean it's not important to you, but it might not be important to you right now. So when
Mm.
it does get important, you might be at a 1200, right?
Yeah.
And you want to get to 2000s or top of the ladder or tour winner, you know. I won't tell you what's at the tour winner
Mhm.
level. Um, but that might be something you desire, and so then it all starts over again. And then,
Yeah, I imagine that will be the case. It's just right now, I think you'll have a lot more opportunity after you've built the other things up,
well,
and you'll have
I'm not
like,
saying that's the thing to do. That was just an example. I could have used your family or
yeah,
working out or your
yeah, of
health.
course.
What I'm saying is, there are always these dimensions, and I think why it might not be, and this is just a theory that just makes sense, because where your attention is where the most order is in your life. When you take your attention off business, and really focus it on romance, it's hard to believe that the business will be as will thrive as much the business part of your existence won't thrive as much if you would just focus 100% of your attention there versus 50-50, or 50 on romance, 50 on business, or 100% on romance, 0 on business. Like, because we have limited amount of attention, time, focus, when you take your attention off something, you take your attention away from your fitness. You used to be in the gym 6 hours a day, blah blah blah, you're naturally going to lose muscle until you do it again. But if you do it again, you take attention from this, and that starts to diminish. So I think there's always some area, sort of like in the yin yang symbol, where it's like in both sides there's like the potential for chaos, as Jordan would say it, right? That's because you can't put your attention everywhere at the same time, all the time, in the equal amount of focus. And like, there are times in your life where romance is way more important. You want wife, kids, blah blah blah, but you're a trillionaire. You're like, okay, that's not that important to me right now, right? And so you have to go on a new journey where you're developing yourself, and then you actually get the skill sets to attract women, but then you don't have any relationship skills. So now you have to learn that, and then you have to develop yourself as a father, and then you have to, like, there are so many games that I don't think, or at least no human yet, has been able to just, I'm the perfect human being and I've mastered every game, and there's nothing else to improve.
See, I've always been a little bit worried that I'm going to run out of things to improve on. It's like, if I'm doing this so quickly, then the potency of that might decrease.
Which is just...
that it won't be every 3 months that I'm looking back and saying, wow, that's insane.
It won't.
It will be every year, and then every 2 years, and then...
it just won't look the same, because you're just saying that because the dimension you're in right now. Besides, it's sort of like, it's a bit of a dose of reality. When you thought you were hot shit, like, and you were only at 1,700, that's nothing. Like, in the grand scheme of things, to players who really did shit, that's like nothing. But it felt like you were somewhere. So right now, it's the same thing. 10 years from now, you're gonna look at this version of you saying that and laugh. Like, if you re-listen to this audio, I dare you, re-listen to this part in 6 weeks, and you'll laugh that you even had that thought, because of how much more you learned. And it's the realization that you're such a fool that you can't even know how much of a fool you are. Like, you literally can't know, because you're that much of a... Like, you can't know, ever. You can never know what you don't know. You don't know, ever.
And internalizing that was really powerful for me at the start of when I was improving. And I remember I messaged you saying that I noticed something where I was a fool, and it was just like, I was completely filled with this sense of like joy. I wasn't even like, there was no sense of dread that I was like, well, I'm not as good as I think I am. It was completely like a positive emotion that I wasn't as good as I thought I was.
Dude, and that's why I know you're gonna do great things. And it's, man, it inspires, like, this conversation. Well, thank you first and foremost, because when I see you're a microcosm, your life's a microcosm of what, like, imagine it. The way I look at things is and Jordan kind of clarified this for me. It's more node-like, right? So I could go, this video did 1,000 views, it's a failure. Or did 1,000 views, only impacted 2 people, it's a failure. Or impact by what I thought impact should look like. But turns out that video impacted the guy that ended up solving world hunger, right? Or some shit like that. Was it really a waste?
It's like butterfly effect.
Right. Or you could go, and I asked you this question back then. I said, who was more influential, Elon or Elon's mom? Right? If Elon's mom wasn't who she was, we don't know what self-esteem things she instilled in him from 10 or at 3. And you know what I'm saying? There's...
You can't quantify.
You can never... I don't know who's more important in all the things that are going to happen. Why is this conversation happening? Was it is it because of me fully, or is it because my mom literally every day, you know, taught me how to read very early, right? And instilled confidence in me, and like, who the fuck knows? And I'll never know.
And you can go one step further to that of like a conversation that my dad had 15 years
Yes.
ago or
Yeah.
something. You know, it's like we have no idea why we're
No
here
idea.
and what caused that.
Or you could go, well, that one battle, right? Or you could go further back than that, the academy, or the hacking, or the like. So when you realize like there's so many unknowns that it's like it'll make your head spin. It's I find it more helpful to look at things in the node like way, where it's like I don't know who this is for. Like this podcast right now, who knows who's gonna get? We've been almost at 3 hours. There might be two people who make it to this point,
Yeah.
and one of them was gonna take their life. And it's like, damn, that last part. And then they didn't take their life, and we never know. We never know that they were gonna take their life and didn't. And then they end up starting some orphanage in fucking wherever the fuck that in 100 years was the reason for the like. Who the fuck knows? And we never knew that the podcast was what the catalyst for that was, because it's not like they came back and said it.
Yeah.
So,
And they couldn't anyway.
right,
They would never know.
right. Well, I'm saying the person who ended up doing that, they might have just in the moment just not taken their life. They didn't know they were going to do all those other things. Right? So that's how I start to look at things, like the action I take now, and that's a different unlocking meaning too. Like that's a like you want to 10x your meaning feeling, right? It's thinking about things in nodes. It's like your pre-workout, you may think the benefits stop at the body or some confidence, or a dude gets laid or finds his family. But when you really start seeing and doing a concept called depth of vision, which is like taking up an acorn and saying, I see an estate, right? Somebody may take an acorn and say, I see an oak tree. Somebody takes it up and say, I see a forest. Somebody takes it up and say, I see an entire neighborhood. Somebody may take it up and say, I see whatever the fuck else, the deeper your depth of vision is. And so your pre-workout, and you really take it to the limits of your current depths of vision, you literally feel your body tingle. And you'll want to go to work at such a level that you've never, you're like, I need to sleep. Logically, I know this. But the level of inspiration and purposefulness and meaning that you'll get inspire in you, and I'll use that word again because, again, you don't know where that comes from, inspires in you.
I'm writing this down because I'm going to do that.
Well,
later.
you have the audio too. I'll release this. I'll have it rendered and stuff. But like the depth of vision part, and going like the node like relationship, and going, that'll sustain you through the times where you're only making 20 sales. You're like, that's 20 people. I don't know how, that one of those guys could, from his wife and kids are about to leave. You just never fucking know. And from your pre-workout, that was the one little thing he gave him the energy. Boom, boom, boom. And you may never hear that testimonial till 5 years later. You're already a multi-millionaire, blah, blah, blah. But you can imagine those situations now.
It just shows that like the good that you put into the world, you can't quantify how powerful that
Never
is.
can.
It could be so much more than you think it is. You may think, yeah, I'm improving this guy's singular workout, but it might not just be the workout. You might have inspired him to go to the gym more and more, and he's improved his like mental situation from it. He's found a purpose, and then because of this, he's like you said, solve world hunger.
Mm-hmm.
It's all a catalyst, and you don't know what you've improved in people's lives. You don't know if you improved like their relationships with family or their like mental state, and you can't quantify how powerful that good is.
Never can. which is I think is a beautiful thing. We try to box everything and well the degree of the good is like but there's just this unknown sort of non-scientific parts of existing that I think they're just better left there, like beauty.
I mean, I find it funny that so many people prescribe to like utilitarianism,
Mhm.
which is something that's essentially impossible in
Right,
practice.
right.
And there are situations where utilitarianism like defies itself. Because if you need to make a quick decision and you're trying to weigh out like what the best decision is, you may have wasted that valuable time. And the conclusion you would come to is that I shouldn't follow utilitarianism because I needed to respond to this action quicker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are absolutes like that aren't. I mean, you could even argue, and it's something I had the thought recently. I was like, sometimes we think about making things perfect, so like getting things to an ideal world or something like that. It's like if I made the world perfect, I'd rob you of purpose. I'd
Mm-hmm.
rob your life of purpose because you'd have nothing to solve. You'd have no use. Purpose and having is something being having a use, right? But if everything is perfect in my life, I don't need you. And you'd think the natural sort of thing would be we'll all just band together and da, da, da. But that's not how we actually like. If you pay attention to somebody who has it all, that's not how we function. We need to better the lives of somebody else. That's the only gateway to meaning. We have to get it through helping somebody else. We have to feel like we're improving somebody else's life to get access to meaning or fulfillment. Cannot be gained any other way. And I've really thought that through before I made such a bold statement. I was like, the way, won't get into all that, but meaning that you only get it when you feel like because of my existence, somebody's going to suffer less. And so the question then is how in what way do I want the world to not suffer? And you picked supplements, I picked freeing people's minds, right? Some people pick other shit. Entertainment, I want to entertain people, right? I want music. It's the same thing. I want other
Mm-hmm.
people's lives to be better. And passion is how you do it. Purpose is why. And so going back to that depth of vision thing, once you start plotting that out, dude, I'm telling you, man, it is, especially if you journal it, like actually write it, it is insane. One, you're going to be just,
I'm definitely gonna have to do that tonight, maybe tomorrow,
yeah,
because it's a little bit late
yeah,
now.
a little bit. But nah, that's, hopefully that answered the question about the running out of things. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, I think it does. So there's always something to do.
yeah, always problems to solve.
There's always.
Always problems to solve. Always people's lives to get improve. Um, Nothing is in
I
stasis.
also think it's interesting what you were saying about the only way to find meaning is to help others. I think there's sort of like a law of the universe that it's easy to
Mm-hmm.
rationalize that there's no meaning, but it's hard to justify that there is
Mm-hmm.
meaning. That like every action that you take is so arbitrary and like
Mm-hmm.
abstract. How can it ever mean something? How can it have any deeper meaning than itself? And yet we know that there is
Mm-hmm.
meaning. I mean, even inherent in the fact that there is a word for
Mm-hmm.
meaning, because a word means that you're pointing to
Right.
something, right? You're saying that something is there. Just the word meaning means that it has to
Right.
exist.
And everybody
So
understands it.
how is it there? Yeah, like deeply understand what meaning
Right.
means, and yet it's so hard
Define.
to even describe that it's
Right.
there.
But it's a feeling, and that then I mean
Yeah.
that's a whole other conversation, um, about where feelings come from. Because you're going to say, oh, well, it comes from and you're talking to somebody who is very familiar with the body, brain, blah, 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 blah. But as I said, things aren't, when you really give thought to certain things and put them in the proper context, if you put it in the context of planet Earth, okay, you can get away with that explanation. But then when you realize that Earth is not the only planet that exists, and it is not even a cell, like a cell in the grand scheme of things, right? Like
It's just
yeah,
tiny, infinitesimally
like
small.
it's inconceivably small in the grand scheme of existence. You really kind of step back and be like, man, I don't know shit. I don't know anything. I'm a
Not only do you not know anything about yourself, the world that you live in, but that world is like a tiny
it's,
fraction, like an inconceivably small. You can't even conceive how
right,
small it is.
because you'd have to conceive how small it is. You'd have to know how big it is, and we don't know that. Like,
Yeah. And that's another thing you don't know. You don't even know how small
yeah,
you know.
it's super humbling and freeing at the same time, because then you'd think that would bring dread, but it actually brings a sense of like joy. It's like, man, I am a fool. Let's fucking do some shit with this time. Like, because you're right, meaning that feeling you get from doing good for someone else is universal. And we can say, oh, well, we evolved it from being in da 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 da. That's one explanation. I don't know if that's factual.
Mhm.
That's just an explanation. It's a belief. Da 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 da. It could be the truth. I don't know. I don't know where that comes from. That's my answer to that.
There's an idea that I've been like tossing with lately, which is sort of similar to what Jordan Peterson says. Although I kind of found this through myself and realized it was
Mm-hmm.
similar. Which he talks about how like making, what is it? Finding order through
Yeah.
chaos. And I talked about sort of the opposite, which is like articulating
Mm-hmm.
chaos through an instrument of order. And if you think about like
Mm-hmm.
writing, what you're really doing is once you reach a stage of mastery, you're listening to yourself and observing like the chaos
Yep.
inside you, whether that's like the id or whatever it's like. What is that? Which one is that?
It's fine. I know what you're talking about.
I'm like
I
narrating
know
now.
what you're talking about.
It's like you're articulating like chaos that's in your own like subconscious or the collective unconscious. And it's the same with music that you're so you're so competent at like whatever like musical instrument that you don't even have to think about that. You're just listening to your own emotions and creating something has that can strike people in a way that shouldn't be possible. You're just playing an instrument. You're making noises, but they can portray something so much more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
The same way that words, you're like they were made to describe what is,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like window or curtain or anything like that is like something that is there.
Right.
And yet we're using them to describe something that isn't there. Like this whole conversation
Mm-hmm.
here. They're all just like words, abstract words, and yet we're speaking to something deeper than ourselves and deeper than they can conceive of.
Yep. Right on the dot. Particularly the words pointing to the word. The word window is not the window. Right. It's just a sound we make, and when you hear that sound, you think of an actual window. And so when we say meaning, it's speaking to the existence of that feeling we get when, who knows the answer to that end part, when you just know when it happens. Because what you're saying is, and this is why I don't think it's arbitrary, you can do something, and we say it all the time, we just don't think about it like this for our own reasons and mental roadblocks and all that. But we say this doesn't feel right, which implies there is a match that occurs with something and you, which implies that it exists before you find it. So where the fuck did the existence before you find it come from?
Yeah.
Like, why do you play Pokemon and not fucking, bowling? You know what I mean? Like, you'd say something like, well, I just don't, it just doesn't feel, well, where does the feeling come from? Why can't you just arbitrarily decide to like bowling? Which implies the predisposition for certain things exists before you even know it's there.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other rabbit hole, but it's just, again, another kind of underpinning on the meaning thing, where it's like, we discover it, like you're saying with Carl Jung, we remember or discover those things. It's not like we just, okay, I'm going to decide to make this meaningful. You can force it, and you can serve people, but if it's not the thing that's quote unquote meant, and we can only sense that through emotions, like you can tell, man, sure, I'm helping all these people at the hospital, but I hate this shit. It's like, why do you hate it? You're helping. Isn't that all that's required? Maybe not. But when you're like, I don't know, doing some other shit, you're like, oh my god, you
just know it when you
right.
know it.
You can only know it by being in alignment with some force we don't even know shit about. And that's how I feel about having this conversation. That's how I feel. I mean, think about it. We're talking about the no-like relationship. Why? Think about all the conversations over the couple. I mean, it's been years, so it might have been. What would be my payoff for the time I invested in you? Like, I didn't know where this was. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, I don't. It's not as if
you had no idea. I was releasing this podcast episode and not realizing that I'd so good.
Right. Like 100. Oh, damn. Theo ended up fucking. You know, like, who knows? But all you can tell is that it feels right in the moment. This is the thing I'm supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And you can only tell through that feeling, and that's connected to past, future, present. That's a whole other conversation. But in the moment, all you have as language is the feeling. Can't articulate it. You can't say why you feel this and why you need to be at the post office at 5 p.m. and then you ended up meeting the love of your life and she was randomly there at 5 p.m. when she doesn't usually, like, there are lots of wonky things that occur that we can't explain.
Yeah, and in that situation, you don't even know if, like, you would have had a different story if you went there with someone else that you met at, like, I don't know, a bakery at like 4:22 p.m. or something.
Right.
Like 2 years later.
Because we can't see all infinite possibilities of how everything will ever occur. So it's like,
we might have like infinitely many situations where we're saying the same thing just about a different person, different place. Yeah. Like, if I didn't play that game, I might have had an entirely different
type of awakening.
I might have like come to the same situation or a very similar situation, just had something entirely different spark it.
Right.
Even if I didn't join this Discord, I might have found someone else, or I might have done anything else.
Right. And because we don't know that, we have to just assume that that's where the everything happens for a reason stuff comes from, because we have to kind of either conclude that it was completely arbitrary, or my actions, your actions and decisions created that occurrence. Right.
I think it's the correct way to view it, because it allows you to be grateful, and it's sort of like a reminder to yourself in the future to observe the opportunities that like come to you.
Yeah, and plus it fucking sucks.
That if you weren't grateful for it, you just wouldn't see the same things in the future.
And if life sucks when you do it the other way. It's like it really sucks when you're ungrateful and unappreciative. It sucks. Like, it sucks when you're nihilistic. It's not fun. So it's.
And I think that's the thing, that it's what I've seen in myself is that it's so easy to be nihilistic. Yeah. It's hard to not be.
I wrote something on that. I'm not sure. Like, I was feeling similarly for the first time ever, and it was causing me to drift. You know, I'm going to read it as we conclude and see. This is going to be just sort of a thing that less for you, but it was a thought dump This is a book that I'm working on that has nothing to do with Pokemon or video games. I actually sent you a quote from one of it, and you were like, "Oh, the I think I sent this to you before, but you
I think it was the one I didn't
yeah,
understand
but now you have a better
at the
understanding."
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it goes. This is a section, and it says, "Why not blow up the planet?" There's something that I feel like there's a lingering thread we didn't complete. Um, Meaning, um, before I read this, meaning, you were talking about meaning, you said something, or you were about to say something, or you said something that made me want to say something, or you asked something.
Was this about like when I was talking about like articulating order through chaos?
That feels close.
That's the last thing I remember.
Articulating order through chaos, through journaling. Maybe it was something that you said that made me want to send you some information, and I just was like trying to remember to do that. But
Was it those things on like how thoughts are formed
no,
and
no, no,
things
no,
like that?
no. That you learn on your own if you need to, but that's not it. It's fine. It'll be whatever. But you said something that triggered, like, oh, I need to either share this with the audience or something like that. The meaning, inspiration. Dang it, it's bugging me too. Feeling, purpose.
I'm trying to rack my brain around it as well. My focus is slowly dying.
It's fine. We're about to wrap up right now, anyway. So it says, title of it is "Why Not Blow Up the Planet." So this was where I was. I don't remember, because I'm in such a different mental state now. But this was just a thought dump. It says, "Why not blow up the planet? What's the point of embarking on this journey? What's the payoff? And is it really worth it? Is life with its struggles and hardships really worth it? Is choosing to exist really the better of the two?" Now, these are pretty heavy, perhaps even dark things for a man to consider, but they are necessary questions to have the answer to, because there will come times on his journey where there will be things that challenge his resolve to not only transform, but even live. In those moments, how does he justify carrying on? What's the purpose? What's the motive? Every man must have a motive and purpose for his movement through the world. This is void of anything external, meaning, what drives a man to continue living and giving his best each day in life? Question mark. I think I wrote that in a way where it's supposed to be a question, but it didn't read like that. So, is it guilt that comes with living in mediocrity? Is it the shame that would come with admitting one's weakness and feelings of inadequacy and simply just giving up? Is it the love of a cause or a person? Again, why go through all the effort to endure the suffering? Why choose life over the alternative? Why choose existence over entropy? It could be argued that it's all pointless. Everyone dies no matter how well they live their life. And everyone they'll possibly impact will die, and one day the earth will no longer exist. So, with those inarguable realities in place, is there really a profound meaning? Why not save time and blow up the planet now and end the misery that so many people are experiencing, struggling to stay alive? This is a necessary question to confront, because life void of meaning or purpose is misery. This is the underlying root of many strong negative emotions, such as hopelessness, depression, and despair. So, the ultimate question is, what would make a wretched existence worth continuing? Meaning, on a fundamental level, life as a human requires effortful movement forward or growth in order to experience consistent positive emotions. Humans do not get to choose whether or not they have to exert effort. The choice was made before their existence. Either they exert effort into something they find fulfilling, or they suffer emotionally from a state of purposelessness. So then the question then becomes, what conditions of living that, when occupied, makes life not only worth living, but worth enthusiastically perpetuating? In what way can a man live his life so that he continues to live fully, perhaps even joyously, in spite of the negatives of existence? At this point, it's easy to assume that hedonism is the antidote. That is to say, if all negative things were removed and he had unlimited access to nothing but pleasure, then life would be worth living. But this is not the case. All too often it is observed how people with access to all the external pleasures of the world still lead lives of misery, and sometimes end up calling it quits. So, if an unending state of pleasure isn't the solution, then is it a lost cause? There exist those who, in spite of many adversities, continue to live life in a zenful manner, or a zestful manner. Their lives are filled with a deep sense of meaning and fulfillment. So what is the root of this? How can people who have all the reasons in the world to be resentful about life still have a feel that it's all worth it? The answer is service, and I put in brackets duty, in addition to pleasure. The answer is giving and accepting. This is a conclusion I came to after writing this, and it's about to wrap up. In other words, the antidote to one's internal dread is a positive intention aimed at the betterment of other people and actions that align with that intention. So the question is not what I would like to consume or receive that would alleviate existential angst, but rather how would I like to reduce the suffering of other people? A man's purpose must answer, what service do I want to perform that brings joy and or reduces the suffering of others in a way that benefits men, women, children, and himself? The greater the clarity, the more inspiration arises from the soul to fuel the will necessary to take action. When that question is answered, a man has found his mission. A man has found his purpose. But that still leaves the ever-looming question, what about remaining alive is so important, so valuable, so sacred? It seems all things that possess this thing called life value it dearly on an instinctual level, despite the struggles that come with keeping it going. But why is it so imperative to remain alive even in the midst of suffering? Would it not be better to end it? And if the antidote to suffering is positively impacting the lives of others, and because everyone suffers on some level, then what's the point of this game? Why not blow up the earth? Why choose life? Why choose existence? This is a question every man must discover the answer to. So yeah, that was something I had to write out in the midst of actually battling with this thought. And after writing it out, all the angst went away and I went back to normal. But hopefully.
So I often have very similar thoughts about it. Kind of comes in, it's like waves. That was what I was dealing with for a lot of the time last year when I wasn't really sure what the point was. And still I see that sometimes, that even though I think I have a strong sense of meaning in what I'm doing, that thought still comes up. But I think you touched on something like incredibly important, which is that action is the way to solve it, right? It's that I think that when you're sat there questioning what the meaning is, there's already no meaning in that, because you're trying to rationalize its existence instead of feeling it. And the way that you feel it is by like seeing it, right? And that comes from your action and moving towards a goal. You almost have to assume that the goal is there before you can actually see the meaning. If you assume the goal is there and like it has some meaning along the journey, and then you go and perform that and you go and do the actions, then you see that meaning again and the thoughts are gone. And then as for, you were saying like the actual reason for existing in general, like what makes life so sacred. And I think it's what got me through when I was a lot younger,
Mm-hmm.
14. I was battling with that thought a long time, and that was probably the worst phase of my
Mm-hmm.
life. But I mean, I never did anything because of the people I
Right.
care about. And I think that was the main thing. But what really saved me from that, if you've read The Power of
Right.
Now, similar to what he said right at the start of the book, which is that when you're in such a state of like
Right.
angst and pain, that you can see clarity from the bottom of it, which is that all of it, for me, it was noticing that most of this was like either pointless or self-inflicted.
Right.
That the pain was, which is the same as like the lack of meaning, is simply because you're questioning it and simply because you know what you have to do and you're ignoring it. And when you ignore it, it gets worse.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing you can do is fight on. And that's where you find the meaning. The instant you start that,
Mm-hmm.
and then you feel great.
Yeah.
And that's what I've noticed in my own life. And I'm still young and naive and
Aren't
a
we all?
fool.
Right. Aren't we all? I don't think,
But that's been my experience.
and a lot of my audience is within that age group. Um, like, I think from 18 to like 30 is my audience. So, obviously younger, older, but we're all in the same boat. We're all fucking doing like, who knows. And I think about the node like relationship from this podcast, and I don't know why I felt inspired to read that. Who knows why the conversation went the direction it did, and who needed to hear a particular moment. Right, there might be 12 people. The part where it was talking about Pokemon, bang, I needed that. The part where we're talking about the universe, and bang, I need it. And that's the part
Yeah. Different things strike different
at the
people.
moment in their lives they're at, and that's like the catalyst, that, and we don't know,
Mhm.
and that's the exciting thing, like we don't know what the long tail of that catalyzation will be, right?
And that's something that I find fascinating, that we can read the same piece of text at different points in our life and it will apply similarly, but to completely different like problems that you're having. That you notice the solution to the problem that you're having, but you don't notice the solution to all of the other problems that are in that text as well. And if you were to read that when you're having a different problem, it would still have the same effect, even though you've like already fixed the problem that you thought it was designed to solve.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We'd be bored otherwise, so I'm glad it's like that, so gives us shit to do. But that's where we're gonna end this podcast episode, guys. If you got to the end, let me know. I know a few people who loves these kind of things and will just like be on a long ride and consume it. Um, but I really enjoyed this kind of thing. If you guys want more, just sort of conversational, sort of journeys of people who, from Pokemon to, I don't know what the fuck I don't know what the title's gonna be, from Pokemon to Power or some shit. I don't know, but Pokemon to prosperity. But if there are so many people who've been on these journeys, Theo is one of maybe thousands. I don't know the real number. I don't want to exaggerate, but definitely hundreds minimum. But it could be in the thousands over the years. Um, so, any final words? Any final thing you'd want if you're envisioning? And don't be shy about it. If you don't know what the node-like relationship between that thing you knew you wanted to say, but because you felt some insecurity or whatever, you didn't say. You don't know what would have happened if you had said it. So, what is, if anything, what would you want to leave with the audience?
I think that people know what they have to do, and that it's their ego and their mind stopping them. And there's something that they're thinking right now that is something that they have to do and a direction that they want to go, and that they need to go and do that. And that's the best solution to problems.
Well said. Well said. Some wisdom right there. No wonder at 5 they were like, "Oh, what the hell?" When you were 5 years old talking about theology. But yeah. Thank you guys, and I mean this from the. You guys know I don't mince words. Thank you from the bottom of my soul, not my heart, my soul. If you listened for even a fraction, and if it had any positive impact whatsoever, I know I'm asking a lot to leave a comment. But similarly, if Theo, let's say, all the whatever happened with him, let's say that I never knew, right? Let's say all this stuff still happened, but he just never said anything. That does matter, because then I have no insight in how my actions are having ripple effects in the world, and you want that. You want to see the positive impact of your actions, right? That's the
I mean, just them talking about it is improving your meaning and it's improving theirs because they're talking about their successes and how they've
right,
improved.
and it's like
So,
it's like points on a ladder. The only difference is, there are no points, but those are the points, right? You're doing this, you're playing, and your points don't move. Over time, you're like, man, am I like, what am I doing here? But when you get those, oh, yo, jam, such and such, it's like, okay, so I'm getting better explaining this. I'm not out here shooting in the dark at something that's not true. No, there is something to this fact that competitive gaming can improve a person's offline life, which is something inconceivable that most people have never considered. It's like, no, we're gonna take this all the way to the fucking end, right? And we can be looking at a very different world where millions of people who are using video games to escape can be their place of liberation, and we have a very different world we're looking at if that happens. Even if it's 100,000 of them, those 100,000 impact another 100,000, and da 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 da. So that's all I have to say on that. Again, leave the comments, guys, if you learned anything, wanted to share something, and thanks, Theo, for taking the time out. I know it's late for you, as it is for me. I haven't eaten or slept in days, but I had to do this, and I'm glad I did. So
yeah, I'm super happy as well. It's a great podcast, even if it was like incredibly long. And I'm gonna be like sleeping so well tonight after
same,
this.
same. This really refueled me. Because I said the past couple of days. But by the way, guys, I'm going to end it here. Peace.